Chapter 651. Wei Wei wiped her cold sweat, feeling that she had just escaped death. How to flirt with a merman's feelings. She had no experience at all, so she had to take the merman away first. Otherwise, with so many dead researchers found in the laboratory, this target would definitely be humanely destroyed. At that time, she couldn't save him. Back home, researchers in this plane were treated very well. So the apartment was particularly big. Because the original owner liked to research, there was also a laboratory here. The neighborhood was very remote, and it was easy to see no one. The nearest neighbor was at least 5 kilometers away. This location was deliberately chosen, for fear that it would affect others when doing experiments. Wei Wei pushed the merman back to the apartment. Then she went straight to the bathroom. Soon after the merman left the water, he would begin to dehydrate and shed his skin. It was as uncomfortable as it could be. There was a large bathtub in the bathroom. She filled it with water, and then pushed the merman into the water. Wake entered the water at once. His face was also underwater. In the transparent water, his golden hair fluttered. His exquisite dreamlike face was in the hair. Impeccable beauty. Wei Wei saw that the wound had begun to heal. The merman's healing ability was very strong. As long as it was not a fatal wound, such as a deep wound on the tail, it would heal to the point where no scar could be seen within a week. Wei Wei immediately rummaged through the house and found an alloy handcuff. She hurried to the bathroom, pulled up the merman's wrist, handcuffed his wrist, and handcuffed it to the water pipe next to him. Wake fell softly into the water, with only one handcuff outside the bathtub. The effect of the anesthetic was probably only for a few hours. Wei Wei decided to use these few hours to cram in her knowledge about mermen. Although she had the memory, Wei Wei felt that she still needed to find more information. Mermen were not human. They were a species that was not studied clearly. She didn't know how to capture them. Wei Wei said to the system, "Your system is too hardcore. Even human and beast love is okay." System. Human and beast love. Wei Wei Are mermaids beasts? It's a sea beast. You can't deny it just because it looks like a human. The system replied, "That seems to be the case. Why would he think of a human-beast relationship when he saw a mermaid? Shouldn't he be thinking of a fairy tale love story?" While Vic was sleeping, memories from his ancestors kept reviving in his mind. The vast and beautiful deep ocean. A boundless blue. In a colorful coral cave. They were the kings of the ocean. They could call the wind and summon the rain. They could bewitch people. He could kill the most terrifying sea beasts with his bare hands. He was the king, the highest leader of his race. All the mermaids had to submit to him. Wake slowly opened his eyes. In the middle of his icy blue pupils, a faint golden color appeared. He saw himself lying in the bathtub, and his wounds were much better. Although Wake was a mermaid, his memory was extremely high. He could remember and learn things that had been added once. He knew things about humans, the things they used, the languages they spoke. He learned this from listening to the voices of the humans outside when he was quietly staying in the culture tank. His hearing was very good. He could hear sounds from very far away. That woman, what was she doing now? Wake listened quietly. He found that she seemed to have just entered the door. He didn't know what she was doing. There seemed to be a faint fishy smell in the air. There was a flash of evil cruelty in Wake's eyes. /read the full article download, the full article read, the full article on. Kanto facilitate your next reading. You can click on the Chapter 652. He slowly emerged from the water, his cold and three-dimensional facial features without any expression. He saw his hands handcuffed to the side of the water pipe. Because he had only been out of the culture tank for less than a month. He had not been brainwashed, so there was no time to do a strength test, nor a real intelligence test. So these people did not know that his strength was far beyond that of humans. He could break the handcuffs with just a light squeeze. He even knew why this group of disgusting humans created him. The woman outside had the same purpose, to exterminate the merfolk. Wake lowered his eyelids. His beautiful eyelashes were long and light, with a faint golden light. He was about to cut the handcuffs when the door suddenly opened. Then the woman's gentle voice sounded. "Wake!" Wake's movements paused, and his ice-blue eyes became deep and dark. He looked at Wei Wei. She walked in, dragging a small cart. It was full of delicious fish. The fish was obviously processed, and the meat looked exceptionally delicious. The raw fish was cut into pieces, sprinkled with some special spices, and there was some delicious seasoned kelp on top. Wake's throat was a little dry and itchy. He swallowed his saliva and realized that he was hungry. It was not that there was no fish to eat in the laboratory, but those fish were not fresh or not to his taste. It was the first time he had seen such delicious fish. Wei Bai pushed the cart in front of him, her hair tied up, and there was some sweat on her forehead. It seemed that it took a lot of effort to process these things. "Are you hungry? Eat some." Wei Bai did not seem to think that he was dangerous, but leaned close to him and said with a smile. The coldness in her eyes was gone. There was no disgusting taste like when she was studying before. Wake's blue eyes looked at her coldly. Then he picked up the food with one hand and slowly put it into his mouth to chew. Wei Bai could almost see that when he ate, his eyes were full of happy bubbles. This was one of the merfolk's favorite foods. But this was freshwater fish. It was not easy to get the merfolk that lived in the sea. Generally, they would not deliberately catch fish in freshwater. That was why they ate sharks. But obviously, this kind of fish was more to the mermaid's taste. Wei Bai opened the medical kit while he was in a good mood. She reached out and touched his fishtail. Wake froze and looked back at Wei Bai coldly. There was a hint of viciousness in his eyes. The tail was the most important part of a mermaid and would not be touched easily. Wei Bai's fingers stiffened, and she turned her head. Her delicate face was no longer as cold as when she was studying it before. Her voice was as soft as a summer breeze. "I know your tail is sensitive, but the wound needs to be tended to." Wake held the fish in his hand, as if he was considering whether to stab her to death with his nails or eat first. Wei Bai ignored his frighteningly cold eyes. Instead, she gently touched his wound with her fingers. The force was as light as a feather. Wei Bai showed a pained expression. "Does it hurt?" Wake's icy blue eyes looked at her coldly and continued to eat his fish. Wei Bai didn't mind and applied the medicine for him. Then she said to him, "I handcuffed you because I was afraid you would move." Wake licked his fingers and took another piece of fish to eat. It was as if he didn't understand Wei Bai's words. Wei Bai suddenly said, "Wake, do you want to go back to the sea?" Chapter 653. Wake's fingers stiffened, the feathery fins near his ears moved, and then he turned to look at her. Those deep eyes were terrifyingly deep. Like the abyss of the sea, there was a terrifying feeling of choosing people to devour. Wei Bai didn't seem to see the murderous intent in his eyes and reached out to change the water for him. "You belong to the sea. When I first saw you being born, I wanted you to go back to the sea." Wake smiled coldly, full of ridicule. He threw away the fish and stretched lazily. His slender neck was raised, but his eyelashes were lowered, and his eyes were full of cold, murderous intent. Humans were just prey to him. If he wanted to kill this woman, it would be a piece of cake. Letting him go back to the sea was to brainwash him. Then he would order his people to surrender. At that time, humans would win, and then all the merfolk would become human slaves and pets. Wake slowly stretched out his fingers and suddenly sang. The song was ethereal and mysterious, echoing in the air. It was full of unknown danger and temptation. But there was a strong, murderous intent in the temptation. Wei Bai looked at him expressionlessly. Her hearing was blocked, and she couldn't hear whether he was singing or if the perfume was poisonous. Wake looked at her strangely. The merfolk song. Humans couldn't refuse at all, but she didn't feel anything. Wake cut off the handcuffs, and without patience, he wanted to reach out and pierce her heart. Wei Bai suddenly said, "I can let you go back to the sea. If I die, you can only be trapped on land." The sea was the place where all the merfolk had to answer, not to mention the king of the merfolk. Wake paused, hesitated again and again, but still stopped the action of killing her. He opened his thin lips, but he couldn't speak the human language. "Wei Bai, do you want to say that I have a purpose?" Wake leaned against the bathtub. The water spread over his waist and his huge fishtail. He nodded elegantly. Wei Bai's eyes softened. "Because you are my child, Wake, way by, do you know? I've liked mermaids since I was a child. I even feel like I was born into the wrong mermaid, not a human. Wake glanced at her indifferently, snorted coldly, and muttered a few words in mermaid language. The system immediately translated. He said that you're ugly, so you're not qualified to become a mermaid. You'll drag down the entire mermaid's appearance. Way by. I thought you couldn't translate it? Way by had a beautiful smile on her face. She couldn't see the cursing in her heart at all. My dream is to see the mermaids, touch the mermaids, and protect them. Wake looked at her sideways. His ice blue eyes were filled with cold scrutiny. It was the scrutiny of the king of the deep sea. He was under tremendous pressure. Wei Bai was used to this kind of pressure. After all, she had been beautiful since she was young. Wherever she went, she would shine. He was used to being stared at, so he wasn't afraid of anyone's murderous stares. Her smile gradually faded. Humans have always been killing mermaids, and the pollution of the ocean is getting worse day by day. Every time I see how many mermaids have died in the news, I feel that we are really demons. Wake didn't say anything, lazily supporting his cheek with his arm. He looked at Wei Bai lazily and nobly. He seemed to be waiting for her to finish, and then kill her. Wei Bai didn't seem to feel his murderous aura at all. She naturally tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Her delicate and clean face was taut. Chapter 654. Her delicate and clean face was taut. I'll let you be born. I never thought of using you. Even today, I'm going to stop your brainwashing. Today, Wei Bai was not on duty, because although she was the biggest contributor to the study of the merfolk, some of the higher-ups wanted to snatch military merits. They did not let Wei Bai come. Instead, they sent their own people to brainwash the merfolk and accept them. The original owner did not go because she wanted to stop the brainwashing. Instead, she wanted to see the brainwashing process and increase the data of the merfolk in her hands. Wake slowly turned his head and looked at Wei Bai intently. His blue eyes had a circle of golden light, beautiful and cold. Like a clear bead, there was no trace of human emotions. Wei Bai did not continue to forcibly arouse emotions to whitewash herself. It was good to leave some leeway for the merfolk to think about it. Her voice was calm as she finished her words. So I hope that one day, humans can put down the butcher's knife and get along well with the merfolk. This was almost impossible, but she said it very calmly. Wei Bai met his ice blue eyes and showed a gentle smile. So Wake, I won't let you be brainwashed, and I won't let you die, because you are a miracle I created. She stretched out a pale and slender hand, with a few pleading in her eyes. Can I touch you? Wake did not move, and she couldn't see whether he agreed or disagreed. But Bai Wei still took the risk of touching him. Her fingers gently caressed his face, which was a work of art. His skin was cold, and his facial lines were too three-dimensional and exquisite. The most beautiful man in human beings was not as good as him. This was a racial talent. After all, the merfolk had always been the spokesperson for beauty. Wei Bai's fingers seemed to have a special magic, which was particularly comfortable. Wake couldn't help but narrow his eyes. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at -25. Wei Bai's fingertips came to his chin and scratched it casually. A few doubts flashed in his eyes. Not a cat. Therefore, he didn't feel anything even if he scratched it. Wei Bai felt that flirting with a cat was better than flirting with a fish. After all, at least she knew what cats liked. Mermaids, in her world, were things of legend. Wei Bai's calm eyes were dyed with traces of hazy yearning. Her slightly ascetic appearance now had the innocence of a little girl. Wake, you're my dream. Wake didn't move, nor did he stop her. The golden light in his blue eyes gradually disappeared. His murderous aura had also dissipated significantly. He couldn't understand her words, but he could hear the tenderness and love in her voice. Vic recalled those ancient memories. In this world, there was only one kind of human who would not be attracted by the lustful song of the mermaid. That was a person with a pure heart. His heart was free of distracting thoughts, without any dark desires. He was like a human being. That was why he was indifferent to the murderous singing of the merfolk. He reached out his fingers and mimicked her actions, placing them on her face. His cold fingers touched her warm skin. She was so soft and fragile. As long as he used a little force, her skull would be crushed and she would die. Wei Wei Bai suddenly laughed. Are you imitating me? Wake, you're only 3 years old. There are many things you haven't learned yet. I'll teach you, okay? The mermaid was stunned. He actually wanted to kill her. He just wanted to see if she was afraid. However, she was smiling foolishly, just like how a parent would be happy to see their child learn something so stupid. Chapter 655. Wake's fingers loosened. His killing intent towards her faded. Ding. The male lead's favorability is at -15. Not tempted by the mermaid's song. A person with a firm and pure heart would not lie. After finding that she was telling the truth and would not pose a huge threat to him, Wake was too lazy to pay attention to this human woman. He lazily returned to the bathtub with a trace of disgust on his face. This place was so small that his tail could barely soak in the water. Wei Wei Bai looked at him lovingly, as if she was looking at her own son. Wake felt that her smile was harmless, but it was awkward to look at. He turned around and faced his back to her. Then he lazily used his hand as a pillow and sank into the water to sleep. Sleeping was the best way for him to learn, because in his sleep, his memories would appear. There were still many ancient memories that he had not learned yet. Wei Wei Bai watched him from the side. Suddenly his tail slapped, and the water splashed onto her. Wake opened his eyes and coldly stared at her. He seemed to be annoyed that she was still here. Wei Wei Bai was covered in water as she stared at him blankly. Her clothes were wet and stuck to her body. The outline of a beautiful body was faintly discernible. Although Wake was only born 3 years ago, his body was growing at an accelerated rate. His body was over 20 years old, which happened to be the strongest and most ferocious age for mermaids. It was also the time when their lust was the most uncontrollable. Mermaids were beasts and generally would not suppress their desires. He saw the water droplets falling under her beautiful collarbone. Under the collarbone, he could faintly see a touch of delicate white. His eyes narrowed dangerously and his muscles tightened. Wei Wei Bai seemed to feel that her clothes were wet and was very uncomfortable, just as she was about to turn and leave. Her hand was held by an ice-cold hand. I want... The voice was ethereal and strange, but full of a special charm. This was a human language. Wei Wei Bai turned around in surprise and saw Wake lying on the edge of the bathtub, looking at her with deep eyes, that deep and sticky feeling of greed. Like a beast, he felt like he was staring at his prey. Wei Wei Bai was really surprised. You can speak human language? Vic's thin lips moved, but in the end, he didn't say a longer sentence. He pulled her hand and slowly reached into the water. He placed it below his abdomen. There was only a faint protrusion there, and nothing could be seen normally. He could only feel the outer layer of fish skin. It was said that that thing would only come out when the mermaid was in heat. Wei Wei Bai's expression changed. She stared at the stupid and shameless fish. Could it be that she was in heat? Wei Wei Bai searched how to calculate the estrus period of a mermaid. But no matter how he thought about it, it was still not the mating season yet. You're not in heat yet, so why are you acting like that? Why didn't the original owner castrate him before releasing him? Wei Wei Bai is an expert in mermaid research. She pretends that she doesn't know where to put it. Her persona collapses. She frowned. Wake, you're still young. This thing is harmful to your body. Wake raised his chin slightly and stared at her motionlessly. He seemed to be waiting for her to serve him. Bai Wei Wei moved her hand, but found that he was too strong, and she couldn't pull it back. She finally said angrily, Wake, I'm going to get angry if you do this. Wake noticed her emotional outburst. His eyes narrowed, and his nails lit up almost at the same time. He seemed to feel that her angry outburst was a provocation to him. // Chapter 656. Wei Wei Bai's temper softened. She took the half-eaten fish beside her and stuffed it into his mouth. Merfolk's teeth were especially sharp. If he wasn't careful, he could crush the bones in her hand with his teeth. Vic paused. A piece of sashimi fell from his lips. He hesitated for a while, then let go of Wei Wei Bai's wrist, picked up the sashimi, and continued to eat slowly. The etiquette of the merfolk aristocrats was to be focused, calm, and slow when eating. This was elegant and noble. Of course, the merfolk at the bottom did not need these. They just caught sharks to eat. In a while, they could eat a shark until only its bones were left. But the memories of the merfolk in Vic's mind were the memories of the aristocrats, the memories of the king. So his every move carried the elegant etiquette of a proper king. Wei Wei Bai took the opportunity to retreat, then walked out. She said, "Is this a merfolk or a teddy bear? He can use anyone he catches, right?" System. Merfolk are lustful, so the male lead can be in heat all year round, just like humans. Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai decided to take the tender route. She really could not seduce a fish that wanted to be in heat all the time. No, she had been mentally preparing for a long time. She still could not convince herself to do anything with a fish. It was too unethical. She originally thought that she had no morals, but she did not expect that after meeting a fish, she would know that she could pick up her morals and use them again. Wei Wei Bai bought a bunch of fish that he liked to eat. After making him happy, she began to take out a picture book as if she was dealing with a mentally retarded person, took out a small blackboard, and wrote AOE. "Come, Vic, let's learn how to speak human language." Facing a fish, and a fish that did not communicate well, Wei Wei Bai wanted to show that people of different races could fall in love. How could they fall in love with a language barrier? So learn, you must learn. Vic soaked in the bathtub, his tail swinging. He swung the words on the blackboard until they disappeared. Then he gave her a sideways glance with those pretty eyes of his, that little sarcastic look. Wei Wei Bai endured. After all, it was a fish. She could not make things difficult for a fish. Wei Wei Bai took out a picture book again. "Come, Vic, read it. I want to go to the toilet. I want to eat. I want to dance. Rip." Vic reached out his beautiful nails and tore the picture book into pieces at a horrifying speed. Wei Wei Bai thought, this was a fish. She could bear it. Wake reached out and threw a bar of soap at Bai Weiwei's head. Wei Wei Bai. He lazily stretched out his slender fingers and hooked them at Bai Weiwei. Then he pointed to his body, indicating for Bai Weiwei to bathe him. Bai Weiwei couldn't bear it anymore. She said to the system, "Do you have a mermaid cooking recipe? I want to braise him." The system said, "Yes, first take out a blunt object and hit the mermaid's head. You need to use the strength of 100 adult men, because the mermaid's head is 100 times harder than a human's. After knocking him out, you need to use a knife like cutting diamonds to cut his bones. Then cut him into a few pieces, steam his head, braise his fish, stew his bones." Wei Wei Bai, the system said, "It looks delicious." Wei Wei Bai. After listening to the system's unappetizing recipe, Wei Wei Bai rolled up her sleeves, picked up the soap, and wiped the mermaid's body. She took out a bath ball and made some bubbles. Vic stayed in the bathtub quietly, his head leaning on the edge of the bathtub, looking at Wei Wei Bai lazily. /download to make it easier for you to read next time. You can click save at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 657. In the end, she had no choice but to use her ultimate move, the art of seduction. Wei Wei Bai hugged him even tighter, and then carelessly, as if she was careless. Her soft lips brushed past the feather fins at his ears. The beautiful feather fins moved. This was the most sensitive part of the mermaid's body, except for the one below. Wei Wei Bai's warm breath blew on his feather fins. It made his body stiffen. This position was like a cat's chin. If it was touched by someone, even the most ferocious animals would soften. Wake's fingers lost their strength and was hugged by Wei Wei Bai. A numb feeling came from the feather fins. It made him squint his eyes comfortably. Wei Wei Bai deliberately chose the place where the feather fins were and began to speak softly. "Wake, don't worry about me. I will be back soon. When I come back, I will immediately take you to the nearest sea area and let you return to the sea." The warm breath kept tickling his sensitive places. The almost transparent blue feather fins began to change color, and a touch of pink appeared. Wei Wei Bai's words were full of sincerity. It was as if she had created him just to put him back into the sea without any conditions. A dark blue color flashed through Wake's eyes, without any emotion. Wei Wei Bai's tone was a little worried. "So you have to wait for me at home, understand?" "Wake home?" He pursed his lips and revealed a sneer. His home was in the sea. How could this woman have the face to think that this narrow and uncomfortable place would be his home? Wei Wei Bai gently released him and found that his claws did not pierce her back. She dodged another bullet. Wei Wei Bai was about to leave, but her arm was pulled by him, and her whole body was dragged into the bathtub. The cold water, with a hint of fishy smell, poured into her mouth and nose. Wei Wei Bai almost choked to death. Although the bathtub was big, this mentally retarded fish was 2 meters long with its tail. It filled the entire bathtub in an instant. After she entered, she practically fell into his arms. Wake's tail flicked. He reached out his long arms and pulled her into his embrace. Wei Wei Bai's cold body and damp breath surrounded her. He moved closer to her and pressed his face against her neck, listening to the sound of blood flowing through her body. Humans were really weak and useless. He bared his sharp teeth and bit down on her neck. Wei Wei Bai felt his teeth sink into her neck and blood flowed out. In an instant, countless images of sharks biting people, crocodiles eating people, and pythons swallowing people flashed through her mind, because she felt that Vic was no different from those terrifying animals at this moment. Wei Wei Bai wanted to struggle, but a piece of information flashed through her mind, so she held herself back. A trace of surprise flashed in Wake's eyes. She thought he would beg for mercy in fear. He narrowed his blue eyes and bit her harder in a punitive manner. Her body trembled a few times, and her fingers clenched tightly. But he didn't run away. This prey was really obedient. Wake loosened his teeth, and his malice towards her wasn't so great. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at -10. Wei Wei Bai knew that her attitude had gained a bit of trust from him, but it was also because of the mark he left on her neck. This was the mark that the merfolk put on their slaves. People who were put on this kind of mark couldn't betray the merfolk. Otherwise, they would be punished by water. If Wei Wei Bai didn't come back, Wake only had to think about it. // Chapter 658. She might be pierced by water and die while drinking. Isn't this the legendary curse that can choke people to death when drinking water? After the mermaid finished imprinting the slave mark, he threw Wei Wei Bai out of the bathtub, and then he began to change the water. He replaced the water that had just been stained by Wei Wei Bai with clean water. Wei Wei Bai, I feel like I'm being despised by a fish. She reached out and touched her neck, looking confused. Because the wound had already healed. The system said, the mermaid's saliva has the effect of healing wounds. Wei Wei Bai, oh. Then she looked at Wake at a loss, and finally said carefully, Wake, you can't bite people's necks so casually in the future. There are many people outside who have weapons. If you attack others, they will hurt you. Wake understood her words. His eyelids lazily lifted, and he glanced at Wei Wei Bai lightly. Then he said, You? These 2 words were uttered with some difficulty. In the end, she still heard him speak human language, although it was vague like a dialect from that corner. Wei Wei Bai heard his question and couldn't help but laugh. I won't, never will. This smile was completely different from her usual one. Her usual expression was always calm and unperturbed. She looked delicate and pretty, not the overly gorgeous appearance of mermaids. But when she smiled, she was also dazzlingly beautiful. Wake's eyes were fixed, and he looked at her expressionlessly. Wei Wei Bai had already waved her hand and said to him, Okay, I'm going to be late. Wake turned over, turned the fish but to her, flicked his tail, and splashed the water at her. He thoroughly demonstrated with his body movements what it meant to scram. Wei Wei Bai didn't mind at all. She smiled gently, feeling like she was wearing the halo of a holy mother. She went out, changed her clothes, and tied up her hair. She wore wide-rimmed flat glasses. Then she went out the door, got in the car, and directly exploded. Trash your grandpa's system. Can you give me another person to guide me? Does this stupid fish think that he's the emperor? When did I serve people like this? After serving them, he didn't even give them a smile. Not only that, he even looked at me with disdain. Just because he has a fish tail, he thinks that it's gold and diamonds. Wei Wei Bai concluded, the most important thing is that the favorability didn't increase at all. The system advised, he is indeed the king of mermaids, so he is used to being served. Wei Wei Bai, if he's a king, then am I a eunuch? The system asked, aren't you a slave? The mark just now was the mark of a slave. Wei Wei Bai then remembered that she was carrying a curse that choked her to death by drinking water. She ferociously searched for a silk scarf and tied it around her neck. Although the wound on her neck had healed, there were still bite marks left behind. Wei Bai drove to the laboratory. When I get to 100, I'll grill him and turn him into a mermaid kebab. I'll sprinkle some pepper and sesame seeds to feed the dogs. The system silently wiped its cold sweat. It seemed that conquering mermaids was still too much for the host. Wei Bai went to the laboratory as a courtesy visit. The military had already surrounded the place, because the king of mermaids was missing and so many researchers had died. So recently, everyone was on tenterhooks. For a while, no one suspected Wei Bai. Plus, she went to work normally, so the suspicion was even lower. Wei Bai finished her work and was about to leave when Chen Mo, a researcher in the same laboratory, came over. The button. Chapter 659. He was the most popular person in this laboratory. Elegant, witty, with military power behind him. So he was very popular. Except for Wei Bai, the original owner was a mentally retarded top student who didn't care about anything other than research. So Wei Bai was just a nodding acquaintance to the people in the laboratory. Chen Mo said, Wei, are you getting off work? Wei Bai stopped in her tracks, raised her head, and nodded expressionlessly. Chen Mo's smile had a trace of regret. I don't know who rescued the mermaid, but it took 3 years and countless resources to give birth to the mermaid. It is indeed a failure. A murderous mermaid was a failure. Even if it was the blood of a purebred king, it couldn't become the kind of mermaid that humans wanted. Therefore, Vic was marked as a failed mermaid in the military and in the laboratory. They were just waiting to find this mermaid and execute him. Wei Bai's character this time was not good with words, so she just frowned. He's not a failure. A dark light flashed in Chen Mo's eyes. It seems that you have deep feelings for this mermaid. Wei Bai pursed her lips, a trace of helplessness flashed across her face, and then bowed her head. If there's nothing else, I'll go first. Chen Mo looked at the silk scarf around her neck and smiled ambiguously. He nodded and moved to the side. Wei Bai hurriedly walked forward, but Chen Mo turned his body and blocked her way. She bumped into his arms. Her body seemed to carry a faint fragrance, wearing a large white robe. She usually looked unusually thin, but surprisingly soft and fresh. Both of them were shocked at the same time. Wei Bai was scared. Chen Mo was surprised. She looked up in surprise. Her glasses knocked down her nose, revealing a pair of beautiful eyes. The old-fashioned and ordinary Wei Bai's delicate and pretty face was revealed at once. Chen Mo stared at her blankly. Wei Bai immediately put on her glasses in a panic, then lowered her head and said, I'm leaving. Chen Mo was speechless for a while before he moved away. Goodbye. After Wei Bai left, he couldn't help but recall her appearance. Chen Mo's mind rippled for a moment before he put away his restless thoughts. He knocked on his head. Yo, now is not the time to pick up girls. The mermaid is the most important. Wei Bai walked out of the laboratory, and her clumsy appearance disappeared. She said to the system, Tongzi, give me the information on that guy. The system searched for the information and sent it to Wei Bai. What's wrong? Is there something wrong with that guy? Wei Bai finished reading the information. Chen Mo came from a powerful family. His grandfather was a great contributor to the founding of the country, and his grandfather was a retired Navy admiral. His father was the current president. His uncles and sisters were all in positions related to the military. Chen Mo himself was a straight-A student who liked to study mermaids, so he entered the lab. It seemed that the information was normal. It was just related to the military. Wei Bai touched her chin. I feel like there's something wrong with this guy. The system said, what's wrong? I looked at the information, and there's nothing wrong. Because this character was not related to the mission, the system only had superficial information. Wei Bai said, I smell a pervert. The system said, you can smell a pervert? Wei Bai said in a deep voice, you don't understand. A normal person can't tell the difference between a pervert's temperament. The system said, is it only perverts who can tell the difference between perverts? Download the at https://m/sashu.com// to make it easier for you to read it next time. You can click save at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 660. Wei Wei Bai was about to nod, but she felt that something was wrong with this sentence. The two of them fell into a confused silence. When she got home, she opened the bathroom door. In the bathtub, the mermaid was gone. Wei Wei Bai. This bare mermaid only knows how to find trouble for me. Her apartment was big, and she didn't know where this mentally retarded fish went. Wei Wei Bai sighed, then rubbed her face. Her expression changed, and she became anxious. She shouted worriedly, "Wake, wake, where did you go?" She ran around in panic, acting like it was the end of the world. The system reminded her, "In your study." Wei Wei Bai nodded immediately. After running through a few rooms, she pretended to accidentally break into the study. The study was the largest room in the apartment. The lighting was also very good, with a transparent roof and rows of books under it. A man stood in the middle of a pile of books. His blonde hair almost reached his ankles, his naked body had a golden ratio, and his beautiful muscles were so perfect that there was not a single flaw to be found. He flipped through the books in his hands, flipping one book after another. When Wei Wei Bai opened the door, she was startled. He also turned around. His delicate and three-dimensional facial features were very familiar. Seeing Wei Wei Bai break in, his pale, golden eyelashes trembled, and his ice-blue eyes looked at her coldly. Wei Wei Bai stared blankly at his absurdly proportioned feet. He was at least 9 meters tall. The mermaid grew legs. Her face was full of confusion, and she finally couldn't help but call out to him in a low voice. "Wake!" Wake leaned against the bookshelf, the brown bookshelf, the sunlight from the glass roof, sprinkling on his beautiful body. It was like an oil painting, moving people's hearts and souls. He threw away the book, pulled out a book on marine research, and quickly flipped through it. Almost without blinking, his pupils were like a camera. In an instant, all the knowledge was memorized in his mind. Wei Wei Bai tried to call out again. "Wake, have you become a human?" As soon as this sentence came out, Vic's fingers stiffened and he threw the book to the ground. A ferocious expression appeared on his calm face. His eyes were filled with cold, murderous intent. He stretched out his finger, and the tip of his finger was like a sharp blade, making people shudder. His posture seemed to be telling Wei Wei Bai that he was not a man. "You are a human. Your whole family are humans." Wei Wei Bai sensed his anger and couldn't help but take a few steps forward. She was at a loss. "I don't mean anything else. Can you grow legs?" This was only possible in fairy tales. Wake coldly snorted, then raised his head and took a step forward, twisting his S-shaped steps as he walked over step by step. Wei Wei Bai, this seductive posture is too eye-catching. Wake didn't take 2 steps before he stepped on a book and fell to the ground. Wei Wei Bai, too lame. If it weren't for the fact that she had to maintain her image, she would probably be laughing her head off right now. Wake frowned. It was his first time turning into a leg, and he was not used to it at all. If it wasn't because the bathtub was too small and uncomfortable, he wouldn't have turned into a leg to come out. Suddenly, a pair of soft hands gently caressed his hands. The woman's voice was calm and gentle. "You can't walk like this. Come, I'll take you." He looked up and saw a smile in her eyes. But it was not ridicule, no malice, pure and clear softness. It was like water, calm sea water. Wake didn't know why. Maybe because she had been marked as a slave and relaxed his guard. He reached out and held her fingers. Fast crossing system. Prince Charming, come here, /fast crossing system. Prince Charming, come here, // fast crossing system. Prince Charming, come here. Download fast crossing system. Prince Charming, come here. Mobile reading to facilitate your next reading. You can click on the collect below to record this reading record. Fast crossing system. Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 661. Wei Wei Bai pulled him and made him stand up. Then she went to get a scarf and wrapped it around his lower body. She didn't look carefully just now, plus his long hair blocked it. She didn't see the important part in the middle. Wei Wei Bai was very calm. While it was quite big, mere people didn't have much shame, so they didn't know that if they walked around without clothes, they would be regarded as perverts. Wei Wei Bai also pretended not to see. So one person and one fish learned to walk in the apartment. Wei Wei Bai patiently held his hand. The body doesn't need to use so much strength. You have legs, so walking is natural. You have to straighten your knees, follow the ground, and then gradually transfer your strength to the toes. Yes, very good. Wei Wei Bai was like a professional and gentle teacher. She taught him how to walk in detail. Wake looked down and saw that her eyelashes were lowered. Her expression was restrained, but there was a faint and warm smile at the corner of her mouth. She seemed very happy to be able to teach him to walk. Her voice was not like the merpeople's, ethereal and seductive, but it was much warmer than the merpeople's. His fingers gently tickled her palm. Wei Wei Bai didn't think much about it. Thinking that he couldn't stand steadily, she used some strength and squeezed his fingers. It's okay. You won't fall. I'll support you. After Wake was born in the culture tank, he had almost never communicated with any creatures. Except for when he dreamed, he could get the memories given by his ancestors. He didn't have anything. The only human he had ever seen was also far away from him, because he hadn't been brainwashed and hadn't undergone a comprehensive examination. They didn't know if he was mutated or if he had any infectious diseases. The very vigilant humans didn't give him any chance to contact the outside world. So the first time he came into contact with other creatures was when he killed people that day. The cold smell of blood was very unpleasant. Meat was also not to the merpeople's taste. There were too many bones, not as good as sharks. He didn't like it. But Wei Wei Bai was the first human he met with a living person's body temperature. She was the one who created him. That was what everyone said when they were in the culture tank. But every time she came to the culture tank and looked at him, her eyes were always cold, as if he was just an object to be studied. Cold and merciless. When did the look in her eyes change? It was as if the calmness and coldness in her eyes had disappeared on the day he killed her. There was panic, but it was not because he wanted to kill her. Rather, it was because if he became a failed merman, he would be executed. He stared at her and saw that she was concentrating on his feet and did not look up at all. Her hair was meticulously tied behind her back, and she was wearing a high-collared shirt, looking ascetic and conservative. Yes, you have to walk in front. Keep walking and pay attention to your posture. It was as if she was leading her own child, without the slightest bit of impatience. Wake's eyes softened. He suddenly withdrew his hand and pinched her chin. She raised her head with a hint of confusion in her eyes. Wake said faintly, "Just like that, don't change your appearance. Don't become the cold Wei Wei Bai of the past." He didn't like that. Wei Wei Bai. Just like what? After Wake said this inexplicable sentence, he let go of his hand and concentrated on walking. Ding. The male lead's favorability is at -5. Wake learned things very quickly. It took him an hour to walk like a human. Seeing that he could walk, Wei Wei Bai was happier than him. Full text //. Download. / Chapter 662. Wei Wei Bai smiled and said, "Yes, you've learned how to walk like this." She let go of his hand after she finished speaking. Vic couldn't help but bend his hand. His thin golden eyelashes trembled, and his fingertips returned to their original cold state. Wei Wei Bai said, "I'll go cook for you." Vic heard this and didn't object. Wei Wei Bai went to the kitchen and took out Vic's favorite fish from the fridge. This fish was fresh and thick. The meat was not difficult to cut, but the bones were very hard. When she was cutting it, it took a lot of effort. Wei Wei Bai said, "What kind of fish is this the knife is about to break?" The system said calmly, keep it up, keep it up." Wei Wei Bai said, "I forgot about the side reward. Where is it?" On the first day when she transmigrated, she was scared by the pool full of blood and forgot to ask for it. The system said, "Didn't I give it to you?" Wei Wei Bai was stunned. When did that happen? The system said, "The mermaid's singing shield means that when the mermaid sings, you can automatically block out the singing without being affected." Wei Wei Bai said, "This is the reward?" The system said, "What do you mean by this? You have to know that to find this, to get this is not easy. And didn't this thing save your life on the first day?" Bai Wei Wei. It sounds very reasonable, but it would be good to have a beauty capable of causing the downfall of a country. The system said, "Every world is beautiful. Aren't you sick of it?" Wei Wei Bai said, "I'm so happy to see my beautiful face every day. I don't have time to be sick of it." The system was speechless. The shameless host had appeared again. Wei Wei Bai complained to the system as she tried to cut the fish. The knife suddenly got stuck. She tried to press it with her fingers, but she couldn't press it down. Wei Wei Bai's fingers were red. She paused for a while and was about to press the knife again. A finger with a slightly reflective nail was placed on the fish's body, and gently pressed, the fish was instantly cut into two halves. Wei Wei Bai's body froze. That finger easily cut the rest of the fish. The fish fillets were so beautiful that it looked like they were cut by a cutter. Wei Wei Bai turned around. She didn't know when Vic was standing beside her. His thin lips were pursed, his beautiful eyes had a hint of languid tiredness. It was as if cutting a fish was easier than cutting a piece of paper. Bai Weiwei suddenly sighed. So powerful, Wake. Vic's fingers, it was as simple as breathing. How was he good? Wake silently glanced at Bai Weiwei, but found that her eyes were full of smiles and admiration. It was as if she really felt that such a simple action of his was very impressive. Wake felt an itch in his chest. He only understood it later. This was the feeling of pleasure after being praised. Vic moved his fingers, pursed his lips quietly, and hid the fluctuation in his eyes. Then he picked up the fish and began to eat. Halfway through the meal, he seemed to suddenly remember something and casually picked up a piece of fish and handed it to Wei Wei Bai's mouth. His action was like giving alms. Wei Wei Bai's smile was a little stiff. Vic, I ate cooked. When she spoke, she had just opened her mouth when the piece of fish was stuffed into her mouth. Wei Wei Bai held the sashimi in her mouth. Vic's eyes suddenly narrowed, his expression cold and full of murderous intent. Wei Wei Bai accepted her fate and ate the sashimi as if she was eating Japanese food. Download. Chapter 663. Wake's fingers gently came to her collar again, and with a light stroke, the collar broke. Wei Wei Bai trembled. Was she going to have a full-body massage and then eat it raw? She said softly, Wake, what's wrong with you? Wake blinked, his clear eyes carrying traces of curiosity and exploration. Then he thought for a moment and said in an ethereal voice, Girl, don't think about escaping. You're mine. These words were spoken intermittently, but it was still human language. It was just not proper. Wei Wei Bai I must have transmigrated into a CEO novel expression on her face. After Wake finished speaking, he began to move his hands. He was taking off her clothes. He was halfway through. He paused again, and then he looked up. His three-dimensional and exquisite facial features were expressionless, but there was a kind of gorgeous and sharp beauty to it. He said laboriously, Move. Wei Wei Bai, what do you want to move? Wake frowned in dissatisfaction. You move. Wei Wei Bai asked curiously. Why do I have to move? Wake showed a touch of cold disdain, as if Wei Wei Bai was mentally retarded. Then he pulled out a book elegantly and coldly. The book was called The Domineering Mermaid Fell in Love with Me. The introduction below the title. 1,000 years of absolute love, the most beautiful encounter between a mermaid and a human girl. That night, she cried and screamed no, but the domineering mermaid president tore her clothes and tied her wrists. Making love. Wei Wei Bai. Wake flipped open the book. He showed it to Wei Wei Bai. Mary Sue Shuyin cried and shouted dreamily. Let go of me. Don't come over. It's impossible between us. You're just a fish. Domineering Jack the Mermaid. No. Why is it impossible? My love for you can transcend race, beyond reproductive isolation, beyond the sea and the desert. Ah, what a refreshing novel. The domineering mermaid fell in love with me. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were a little bad, and she felt like she was going blind. She finally knew what he meant by moving. He wanted her to struggle. Wei Wei Bai was so excited that she broke free from the headband. She said with an ugly expression, Wake, you're still young. It's not good for you to look at this thing. Wake seemed to find her words funny, and he put the book on his back. The evaluation was written on the back of the book. The best way for humans and mermaids to get along is in this book. Wei Wei Bai. She said she wanted to eat sashimi to calm down. Vic flipped through a few more pages. The tip of his tongue entered her lips and stirred wantonly. His hot breath surrounded her, causing her mind to go blank. Wei Wei Bai. There was a hint of curiosity in Wake's cold eyes. He pointed at the description of the kiss and stared at Wei Wei Bai without blinking. He seemed to want to imitate the movements inside. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while, then suddenly reached out, snatched the book from his hand, and threw it away. Wake's fins spread out at once. His beautiful face had a hint of anger, and he let out a low, threatening shout from the depths of his throat. His fingers also plunged into the sofa, bringing out the cotton wool on the sofa. Wei Wei Bai stiffened and didn't dare to provoke him again. Wake snorted coldly, as if he felt that she didn't know what was good for her. He got off the sofa, ignored her, and went to get the book. Wei Wei Bai reached out and pressed her forehead. She had a splitting headache. Tongzi, I don't think I should make a move on a fish. It's immoral. This was also the reason why she insisted on taking the warm route, because she really couldn't flirt with a fish. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 664. It was a bit similar to humans. If their teeth were not so hard, it would be more similar. Wake looked at her coldly, as if he was waiting for her explanation. Wei Wei Bai's face turned red. She was at a loss and said seriously with a cold face, "This is kissing. This action can only be done to the person you like. It is a very sacred and serious thing. It is not a child's play like in the books. Do you understand?" The feather fins beside Wake's ears moved. He said with difficulty, Like. Wei Wei Bai nodded coldly, like a tutor saying, "Yes, like." Wake tilted his head and thought. He reached out to grab her shoulder and looked at her coldly. "You like me?" He was accumulating more and more human language. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and bowed her head in embarrassment. "I am only teaching you, Wake." Wake's eyes narrowed dangerously. His legs suddenly disappeared, and a huge fishtail appeared, sweeping Wei Wei Bai down. Wei Wei Bai directly fell to the ground, but saw Wake's upper body standing upright, a section of his fishtail supporting the floor. He looked at her expressionlessly. Beautiful muscles and a fishtail. Under the light, there was a beautiful reflection. He raised his chin high. The cold and beautiful outline of his face was full of the indifference and nobility of a king. He said a clear and ethereal sentence in the mermaid language. The system translated, "You can only kiss me if you like me." Wei Wei Bai understood, but her face was confused, as if she did not understand. Wake bared his teeth, like a beast's annoyed expression. He said to himself again, the system translated, "If you don't like to kiss me, you will defile me. You will be torn apart by me." Torn apart. Wei Wei Bai immediately thought of the researchers who died in the pool. She shivered, and then looked at him hesitantly. The blush on her face was more obvious, and there was a trace of tenderness and shyness in her eyes. It flashed by, just enough for people to see, and then disappeared in the blink of an eye, appearing exceptionally natural. Then she said, "You deserve everyone's love. You're perfect. I can't imagine anyone in this world not liking you." This sentence was very obvious. Everyone liked him, including her. After Wei Wei Bai finished speaking, she helplessly reached out to support her glasses, only to find that she had already taken off her glasses when she got home. Now, he was even more at a loss. She immediately turned around. "Your fishtail is back. Hurry up and go back to the bathroom." After she finished speaking, she had only taken 2 steps when something suddenly hit her foot heavily. Her legs turned to jelly, and she rolled onto the ground again. A fishtail wrapped around her, and Wake instantly pressed down on her. He looked at her coldly, his movements aggressive. As he approached her, he sniffed her hair and neck, as if he was looking for a place to lower his mouth. Then he stared at her lips. It was watery and looked delicious. Vic lowered his head, wanting to imitate her actions and kiss her. But then he thought of what she had said, that he could only kiss her if he liked her. Like his heart was numb and itchy, but Vic ignored this feeling. He wouldn't like her. She was human, so he couldn't kiss her. He couldn't kiss her even if it was comfortable. Vic frowned unhappily. He could only open his mouth, bare his teeth, and bite her neck again. This was the place where the mark was, so he had to bite deeper. That way, she wouldn't be able to escape. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 5. Wei Wei Bai hissed in pain, and Vic unconsciously softened his strength. Chapter 665. Then he left her neck and licked the blood from his mouth. Unexpectedly, his face appeared three-dimensional and exquisite with a trace of evil. Wei Wei Bai covered her neck and lay on top of him, so fragile that he could easily control her. Wake curled his lips in satisfaction, then left her and crawled into the bathroom. After his fishtail came out, he couldn't stay in a place without water for too long. After entering the bathtub, Wake immersed himself in the water. He opened his eyes and looked at the things on the water. Wei Wei Bai walked into the bathroom and leaned over the bathtub. Her delicate face, in the light of the water, had a clear beauty. There was still shyness and helplessness in her eyes, and her tone was worried. Wake, have a good rest. I've already contacted a car. I'll take you out tomorrow. Wake stared at her, only to realize that she was going to take him back to the sea. If he returned to the sea, what would she do? Humans were the species that mermaids hated the most. Wake was no exception. In his memory, there were cruel scenes of humans slaughtering mermaids. Mermaids resisted, humans attacked. Or mermaids attacked, humans resisted. It was a hatred that would not rest until one of them was dead. Wake actually didn't believe that she would take him away at first because he was a mermaid. Just like how he hated her, shouldn't she hate him as well? Wei Wei Bai still whispered, "If you go back to the sea, no one can hurt you, and I don't have to worry." Wake didn't say anything. He lay quietly in the water, his long blonde hair floating in the water with the luster of colored glass. His face was quiet, his eyelids were half closed, and a touch of faint ice blue was deep in his eyes. Wei Wei Bai stared at him, and the calmness in her eyes gradually turned into gentleness. The gentleness became affectionate again. Wake felt that this look was very familiar. In his memory, it was the past of his ancestors. Some mermaids also looked at people with this look. It was the look of looking at a lover. Wake's heart was beating a lot faster. Being looked at like this, would his heart beat uncontrollably? Wake was puzzled and silent. Would humans really like mermaids? As Wei Wei Bai spoke, her eyes slowly closed. She leaned against the side of the bathtub and fell asleep with her head resting on the bathtub. Her breathing was light and steady. Not long after, the sound of water splashing came from the bathtub. Vic came out of the water and leaned close to her, baring his teeth as if he was threatening her. But she fell asleep without realizing it. Vic reached out, his fingernails sharp, and stopped just before he reached her face. She still had no reaction. Wake retracted his hand, and his long, wet hair fell on his chest. He coldly curled the corners of his mouth and said in the language of the merfolk, "Fragile humans are not worth me bringing into the sea. Such a fragile and unwary human being would only end up dead if they entered the sea." After sending him to the sea tomorrow, she would complete the contract. He had no choice but to kill her, because humans who were marked by the merfolk couldn't survive on land. The humans would not let her go. Rather than being killed by someone else, he might as well let him, the master, do it. Wake dived into the water again and closed his eyes quietly, but after a while, he opened them again. His chest felt extremely tight. This kind of discomfort was similar to irritability, but it was more complicated than irritability. But he didn't know why he felt so uncomfortable. Wake shook his fishtail and frowned in distress. Why did he feel uncomfortable? Wasn't he supposed to return to a high? And in a place he didn't know, a crisp reminder sounded. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 10. Chapter 666. When Wei Wei Bai woke up, she found herself lying outside the bathtub. It was impossible for her to wake up, be carried to bed by a man, and be covered with a blanket while he was at it. She was still woken up by splashing water. Wei Wei Bai's head and face were full of bath water. When she sat up in a daze, she saw Vic looking at her with a cold and noble face. She looked at him too. Her brain couldn't work for a while, and her eyes were covered with mist. Vic was dissatisfied and swung his tail at her face again. Wei Wei Bai silently reached out to wipe the water before she woke up. Then she resigned to her fate and went to prepare breakfast. While preparing, she said to the system, "My life is so hard. Tongzi, can't you change to a target who likes to do their own housework?" This broken merman didn't know anything. He was picky about food. He made a mess in the bathroom. In the end, she still had to clean up. Wei Wei Bai expressed that if the host also had a favorability, she would definitely have a favorability of -100 for Vic. The system said, the target of the mission is random. If I could choose, I wouldn't choose you as the host. Wei Wei Bai, the system, it spilled the beans. Bai Wei Wei showed a kind smile. I think there are still similarities between the two of us. If I could choose, would I choose you, this broken system with nothing to do? Come on, let's hurt each other and sway together. Wei Wei Bai and the system looked at each other with disdain. After feeding the merman breakfast, Wei Wei Bai looked at her phone and found that the car she contacted had arrived. Wei Wei Bai came to the bathroom and showed a smile, with some reluctance in her eyes. Vic, the car is here. It's a confidential service, so don't worry about anyone knowing about your existence. Vic held his delicate chin and stared at her calmly, without a trace of emotion. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but wipe the corners of her eyes. After you return to the sea, keep swimming to the deepest part of the ocean, where your people are. Vic was silent. He heard the car arrive outside the door. She didn't lie to him. She wanted to send him back to the sea. Although Wei Wei Bai was smiling, her expression was extremely sad. I can't accompany you. I don't have a fishtail to follow you back to the sea. Although your body has matured, it has only been a month since you came out of the culture tank. I'm worried that you won't be able to adapt to life in the sea. What if other mermaids bully you? As she spoke, she pulled out a luggage bag. He took out the things inside. This is a mermaid stun button. If a bad mermaid wants to bully you, electrocute him. This is the mermaid snack, dried fish. I bought a few bottles for you. If you're hungry, you can eat it. This is a mermaid. She rambled on like an old mother instructing her son, who was on a long journey. Vic, I don't need anything but dried fish. His blue eyes looked at her indifferently, but under the calmness, there was a different feeling. Not being able to experience the worries of others was a strange feeling to him. The ancient memories of the merfolk taught him a variety of survival skills and a variety of profound knowledge, and the ability to command other mermaids. But there were no mermaids who could teach him what feelings were, what warmth and love were. And Wei Wei Bai's mutterings were obviously things he didn't need. But it didn't make him impatient. Vic lowered his eyes and bent his fingers under the water. Before returning to the sea, he should kill this slave. Chapter 667. Wei Wei Bai. Wake, did you hear that? Wake just had the intention to kill when he heard her call. He didn't know if it was because of a guilty conscience, but his heart tightened and he quickly released his fingers, worried that his bad thoughts would be known by her. This action was only for a moment, and a strange doubt appeared on Wake's delicate face. If he wanted to kill her, he could kill her. Why would he feel guilty? Wei Wei Bai carried the mermaid's luggage. Okay, let's go. Wake stood up when he heard this, and the water fell from his body. Those bright muscles, beautiful abs, and slender limbs were all on display. He made human legs again. Mermaids didn't seem to be able to make legs. That's what her mermaid information said. Perhaps it was because of Vic's genetic mutation that he was able to produce a pair of legs that were as beautiful as a model's. Wei Wei Bai's expression didn't change, and she brought over a set of men's clothes. She had just bought it to prevent this shameless mermaid from going out in broad daylight and scaring people. She smiled like an old woman. Come, I'll dress you. Wake glanced at her indifferently and disdainfully, then stretched out his claws, grabbed the clothes, and quickly put them on. When he killed people, he cut up the bodies of those researchers. While he was at it, he remembered the shape of the clothes they were wearing. He also remembered the order in which they were put on. A simple t-shirt, worn by this heaven-defying clothes rack, made him look like a top model of Fashion Week. His blonde hair was tied up and fell behind him, and his beautiful ice blue eyes carried the deep indifference of the deep ocean. When he didn't move, you would believe that he was a prince of any country. Wei Wei Bai, who was used to seeing beautiful eyes, was actually stunned. Her serious and expressionless face softened, and there was gentle admiration in her eyes. Wake didn't know why, but when he saw her expression, he couldn't help but raise his head, and his posture was even more arrogant and beautiful. Just like when mermaids were courting, they would always unconsciously show their good-looking side. If they had a fishtail, They would even shake it. Of course, Vic quickly reacted back. Facing a slave, what kind of good posture could he make? Wei Bai stretched out her hand. Come, Vic, let's go. Wake pursed his lips and looked at her indifferently. He reached out his hand, but when he was about to place it on hers, he took it away. Then, with a cold expression, he walked towards the door with the steps that Wei Bai had taught him. Wei Bai sighed in resignation. Like a middle-aged mother, she carried her luggage and followed behind him. The mermaids in fairy tales were gentle, pretty, and innocent. The merfolk here were cruel, shameless, and indifferent. Fairy tales were indeed the best. When he walked out of the door, he saw the hired car parked at the entrance. Wei Bai walked over. The driver took out the form, and she signed her name. Then they quickly got into the car. The car was huge, and there was a huge water tank at the back of the car. At first, she didn't prevent Vic from walking on his own, so she planned to put him in the water tank with his fishtail. It would take at least 2 hours for the car to reach the nearest seaside. And it was not enough to reach the seaside because the seaside was a military defense, so he could only hire a boat to go to the deep sea before he could go to the sea. The car arrived at the port smoothly. Wei Bai jumped out of the car, and Vic followed. The sound of the waves was like an ancient song, echoing in his ears. There was a hint of excitement in Vic's eyes. It was the smell of the sea, the wind blowing from the sea, and the familiar sound of the waves. // Chapter 668. He suddenly wanted to let her know that she would be killed by the mermaid she created. What would her expression be like? Would she regret saving him? Wei was stunned. She stared at him intently, and the smile on her lips disappeared. She looked away again and looked at the sea. Death, I knew that after letting you go, I would be found and executed sooner or later. The crime of letting a mermaid go would be spurned and sentenced to death. This sentence was faint, without a trace of fear. She even smiled, but I am not afraid of death because my wish has been fulfilled. Wish? Wake's face, under the sun, was still cold and gorgeous. His eyelashes drooped slightly, covering the surging ice blue in his eyes. His fingers couldn't help but bend, but it was not murderous, but unexpectedly irritated. She knew she would die. Wei Bai's face was relieved. Yes, my wish was to create a mermaid and then watch him return to the sea. I thought it would take me many years to succeed, but I didn't expect it to only take 3 years. So Wake, you are really my lucky god. She usually had a straight face, but at this moment, her face was full of smiles. Her eyes, without glasses, were sparkling. Beautiful, soft, and delicate. There was no fear in her eyes in the face of death. Even if I die, my life is worth it. With that, she handed him the luggage in her hand. Wake, here, go home. Her attitude was so natural, with a faint smile on her face, and the gentleness in her eyes almost overflowed. Wake didn't move. His ice blue eyes stared at her. It seemed to be looking for traces of her lying. But there was none. That legend appeared in his mind again. A person who is not tempted by the mermaid's song. The body hides the purest soul. No lies, no evil desires. Wake heard his irritable and suspicious heart and began to calm down. But another feeling, like the sea in a storm, was surging and abrupt. His eyelids were half closed, hiding the surging blue light in his eyes. Then he slowly approached her. She had a clean, light fragrance, and the mermaid, who repelled humans, actually felt that it smelled good. Wake's expression was indifferent, and no one could see the violent fluctuations in his heart. He reached out his finger and slowly lifted her chin. Wei Bai looked at him doubtfully. His black eyes were as clean as the water in the ocean. There was none of the greed, hatred, and twisted viciousness that he had when facing the merfolk. Wake heard his cold and hard doubts begin to collapse. I want you dead. He was going back, so he had to kill his own slave with his own hands. This was something that many mermaids would do. Her cold and sharp fingernails rested on her chin. With a light flick, she could pierce through her chin and peel off her skull. For the merfolk, if a human lost their weapon, they would not be able to escape. It was just a terrifyingly fragile creature. Wei Bai looked at him blankly. She didn't seem to understand what he was saying, and the smile in her eyes gradually disappeared. She blinked, and tears appeared in her eyes. Then she said softly, "Yes." After that, she didn't move, struggle, or try to escape. She maintained the same posture and looked at him with teary eyes. There was some sadness and grievance in it, but there was still no fear or disgust. Wake felt that those memories couldn't help him, because in his memory, there was no human like Wei Wei Bai. // Chapter 669. The two of them maintained the same position for a long time. Wei Wei Bai felt her neck was sore. She moved a bit. The soft skin of her chin was next to his fingernails. It looked like they were about to cut through the skin. Wake immediately retracted his hand. Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely. Wake looked at his hand. He pursed his lips in annoyance, some struggle flashing through his ice-blue eyes. Then he softly said a sentence in the mermaid language. "System, translator system. Seeing that you were so loyal, I will spare your dog life, scram, young girl." Wei Wei Bai. Was it really good to translate so roughly? Wake looked at her one last time. She had already lost her disgust for humans. His thin lips opened slightly, and he suddenly sang a song. The ethereal mermaid song, as clear as the abyss of the sea, with a charming tremor, resounded all around. Wei Wei Bai had a calm expression. She couldn't hear his singing at all, because the mermaid's song blocker was working again. This line reward was not as good as the previous one. This main system wouldn't be getting poorer and poorer, right? The song brought a school of fish, all kinds of colorful fish, flocking over from all directions. All kinds of colors, all kinds of shapes surrounded the boat. Then they began to dance back and forth. It was so beautiful that it made people feel like they were in a dream. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. This net, how many pounds was it? Wake sang a song for a while. This was the song that summoned the most beautiful fish nearby. The fish were all dancing. He stood by the boat. Seeing her look of admiration, he couldn't help but smile. Just treat it as a reward for bringing him to the sea. Wake ignored the different emotions in the depths of his heart. Even joy. She looked at the fish, turned to look at him. There was a trace of joy in her voice. "Wake, did you call them? You are so good." Wake's face was cold. His body stood even more arrogantly. He suppressed the smile on his lips, the sharpness in his eyes gradually softening. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 20. The school of fish danced for a while before dispersing. Wei Wei Bai knew that they were about to part, so she waved at Wake. "Goodbye, Wake." Wake looked at him deeply, then took a few steps back. Just as he was about to enter the water with his fishtail, his pupils suddenly constricted and his body leaned back. Suddenly, a few spears popped out of the water. The sharp points of the spears could pierce into the bodies of the mermaids. Vic dodged. The boat they were in began to sway, and a submarine rose from the water. The door above the submarine opened, and a familiar person climbed out. It was Chen Mo. He looked at Wei Wei Bai with a gentle expression. "Wei Wei, it's been hard on you to bring the mermaid here. Next we'll catch him." Wei Wei Bai. Why does it sound like she deliberately brought Vic here to walk right into the trap? Ding! The male lead's favorability has decreased by 5, 15 remaining. Wei Wei Bai turned around and saw Wake's cold eyes staring at her. This mentally handicapped fish really believed it. A helicopter flew in the sky, setting up a large machine gun to kill mermaids, and several large boats came from the distance. It was probably filled with shells and gunpowder. Chen Mo waved his hand. His eyes became twisted and sinister. This failed mermaid will go against humans when he returns to the sea, so he must be caught and executed. His body also needs to be dissected for research. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "Look, I told you he was a pervert. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. Download the https://www.sashu.com/transmigration system. Male god, come here. Download the full article. https://www.sashu.com/transmigration system. Male god, come here. Download the full article. https://www.sashu.com/transmigration system. Male god, come here. Download the full article. https://m/sashu. Combo make it easier for you to read next time. You can click at the bottom to record this reading. Transmigration system. Male God come here, comma. Chapter 670. The system said, "Yes, you really know a lot about perverts." Wei Bai said, "Scram. Wasn't this implying that she was a pervert too?" Large spears were set up, and all of them were aimed at their pitiful little boat. Dozens of the spears that were used to kill the merfolk were thrown at the boat. Vic's entire body stood upright, his fishtail supporting his upper body. A golden light appeared in his blue eyes. The waves rolled, and he let out a long howl, sharp and full of anger. Then he rushed out and knocked away a few of the merfolk's spears. A spear stabbed into Wei Bai's foot and pierced a big hole. Wei Bai's legs were about to go soft, and she would become a roasted fish if she wasn't careful. Vic came to her side, grabbed her hand, and flung her away. Another spear just happened to shoot through the place where Wei Bai was standing just now. Wei Bai sat on the ground. Her buttocks were hurting badly. She looked up and saw that Vic had just lowered his head. His eyes were terrifyingly cold, and he looked at her with full of anger. He coldly said a sentence in the merfolk language, arrogant and cold, full of terrifying deterrence. The translator said, "Woman, you betrayed me." Wei Bai said, "No, I didn't listen to my explanation." Unfortunately, before she could say anything, the boat was blown up. A cannonball was thrown directly at the boat, causing a small explosion. This stupid fish, didn't he see that the group of people wanted to kill her as well? If she betrayed him, she would have been watching the show on the submarine. The fierce fire made Wei Bai feel the burning pain. She leaned against the railing with a pale face and watched the fire on the boat. The merfolk's back was facing the fire. His golden hair was flying in the wind, and his ice-blue pupils had almost turned golden. He suddenly sang, and his voice was full of the power of seduction. Chinemo, who was in command, had a blank look in his eyes on the submarine. He slowly walked out and fell into the sea. Vic looked at him coldly, full of evil intentions. All humans deserve to die. But in the next moment, Chinemo suddenly revealed a twisted and arrogant smile. The blankness in his eyes disappeared, and he raised his hand to take out a silver gun and hit Vic hard. The silver bullets were coated with venom. It could make mermaids lose most of their power. Wake only felt a sharp pain in his body. He crawled to the ground and revealed his sharp white teeth. The flames on the ship would soon reach them. He looked up and saw Wei Bai leaning against the railing. Her face was pale and her body was trembling. "What are you afraid of, you traitor?" Wake opened his mouth and was about to chant an incantation to make the blood in her body pierce through her body. This was the power of the mermaid mark. But before he could finish, Wei Bai had already crawled over with all her might. Her whole body was trembling, and she reached out to hug him. Her thigh was cut by the sharp thorns of his fishtail, and blood flowed out. She wasn't afraid at all as she hugged him tightly. Her aura was incomparably chaotic as it blew by his ear. "Vic, I'll hold them off. You get into the water and escape." Wake froze. The incantation in his mouth was interrupted, and he forgot for a moment. Her voice was so panicked, but it wasn't for herself, but for him. The bullets in his body began to soak into his internal organs. Chinemo saw them like this, coldly raised the corner of his lips, and continued to aim at them, firing again. Wake saw it and almost didn't think much about it. He pushed Wei Bai away and then rolled quickly to avoid the bullets. Chapter 671. Chinemo was tired of this small fuss. He ordered the military in his earpiece. "Blow up this boat, then harvest the body." "What about Professor Bai?" Chinemo said, "Of course kill them together. This kind of idiot who likes mermaids is a disgrace to humanity." As he finished, he suddenly saw Wei Bai stand up. She walked to the side of the boat. Her clothes and hair were a mess, looking very awkward. But her eyes were full of condemnation as she looked at him. Then she opened her arms and blocked the mermaid behind her. Even if this could not block the attack from the sky, but it could block the bullets in his hands. Chun Mo was stunned. Then he smiled ferociously Yo, interesting, you really like mermaids and you're still a human. Wei Wei Bai smiled coldly and said bluntly, if all humans were like you, it'd be good if they weren't human. Chunimo still had the mood to say, what about me? I'm too handsome. Wei Wei Bai said, you look like a human. Why are you so cheap? If I don't like mermaids, why would I like an evil, ugly, narrow-necked, middle-aged old man like you? Chunimo thought, I'm only 25, he laughed, gritted his teeth and said, sister, you've pissed me off. I'll give you a chance. Kill that mermaid and I'll let you go. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, am I an idiot? He's using this kind of low-level trick on me? The system said, I'm not afraid of old tricks. I'm just afraid that they won't work. Wei Wei Bai said, indeed, they won't work. Can I kill Vic? If I could, I would have cut him into sashimi long ago. Why would this ugly guy have the chance to trick me? The system was speechless. The male lead of this world was so unlikable. Chunimo raised his gun and shook it. Quick, kill the mermaid. Stop pretending. You're afraid of death. Humans were all afraid of death. Chunimo was too familiar with human nature. Bai Weiwei looked at him indifferently. In the midst of water, her face was dirty, and her appearance was unbearably messy. But it didn't hurt the stubbornness in her eyes and the unyielding light in them. Chunimo frowned. Then, with a sinister smile, he suddenly fired. Disobedient people should die. As soon as the bullet was fired, Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows. Just as she was about to find a good position to dodge, her feet were hit by something heavily. She fell to the ground. The beautiful fishtail hit her leg hard, as if warning her not to run away. Wake immediately dragged her and was about to jump into the sea. His eyes had turned into the fierce sharpness of a wild beast. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but whisper, Wake, you should go. Wake didn't say anything. His face was abnormally pale, and the venom made him fall into a trance. The sea was still calling out to him. His people were in the depths of the sea. She couldn't sense his presence. He had originally wanted to leave, but when he looked up, he saw this slave actually open his arms in a foolish attempt to protect him. Could she protect him? No, wasn't she with the humans? Wake's heart was filled with anger just now. He couldn't wait to tear Wei Wei Bai apart, but he hesitantly pulled back his fingers when he reached out. Now that he saw her overestimating herself to protect him, that kind of anger actually disappeared again. Wake jumped into the tumbling sea with Wei Wei Bai in his arms. Chunimo. Fuck. Do you really think I'm that kind of stupid villain? I'm so handsome that I'm the protagonist. Do you think I'll let you jump into the sea and run away? The people he brought were all wearing the mermaid song blocker. Chapter 672. He had already calculated the mermaid's song, not to mention a mere jumping into the sea. He snapped his fingers, and a huge sea net rose from the sea. The huge sea net was wrapped into a ball, and he caught Wei Wei Bai. Chun Mo's expression changed. He had people put down the sea net and threw Wei Wei Bai at his feet. Wei Wei Bai almost choked to death. She choked and coughed, frowning, and her expression was very ugly. Chun Mo asked, Where's the mermaid? Wei Wei Bai looked up, coughing and laughing. She ran away. With this broken net of yours, you can only catch a poor and weak girl like me. Chun Mo chuckled and suddenly carried her in his arms. Wei Wei Bai couldn't refuse and looked at him warily. What are you doing? Chun Mo said, The mermaid ran away, but you can't run away. I heard that the mermaid can grow legs. That's really rare. I'll hand you over to the military for interrogation. They'll dig out the little tricks in your brain and hang you. When he said this, he was unbelievably gentle. Pervert, Wei Wei Bai silently concluded. Chun Mo got a small boat to come over, and then took Wei Wei Bai back to the big ship. The mermaid was shot and couldn't dive into the deep sea. When the venom acted up, without medicine, there was a 90% chance of death. So Chun Mo wasn't in a hurry. He hated mermaids and hated Wei Wei Bai's attitude even more. The sky suddenly darkened. The song, a resentful and cold song, was different from the seductive song just now. This time, the song was terrifying and heroic. Chun Mo carried by Wei Wei and looked at the sky. Thick and terrifying dark clouds were surging over. Then there was the roar of thunder and lightning, and bean-sized raindrops suddenly fell. The waves turned black, and the sea was like a terrible beast, roaring. Everyone panicked. Storm? Why did the storm suddenly come? Wei Wei Bai saw this scene and suddenly thought, mermaids could summon wind and rain. But not all mermaids had this ability. A huge wave came crashing over, covering the entire ship. The turbulent sea water smashed onto everyone's heads. Chunimo was knocked down, and so was Wei Wei Bai. She had almost drowned, and now she couldn't even stand up. The ship shook violently. It was as if they had angered the god of the sea. A storm raged, and the waves roared, wanting to overturn all the boats. A few helicopters also fell from the sky. They were blown down by the hurricane. It was like the end of the world on the sea. Wei Wei Bai suddenly heard someone calling her. She used all her strength to carefully stand up. She grabbed the railing and walked step by step, as if she was looking for something on the sea. In the billowing black water, a golden light appeared. She stopped and said hoarsely, "Vic in the sea." A vigorous figure emerged from the water. Vic's golden hair floated on the sea surface. His blue eyes had been replaced by gold. They were as cold and ruthless as the eyes of a wild beast. He stretched out his hand, his thin lips moving slightly before he said coldly, "Come down." The cold sea water rushed everywhere. Wei Wei Bai stepped over the railing and was about to jump when one of her legs was hugged by Chunimo. Chunimo laughed until his whole body trembled, as if he had seen a joke. "You really want to go down? Did you know? He was poisoned and can be cured by eating human flesh. You'll be his meal if you go down." Wei Wei Bai sighed, "You really talk too much. I'm willing to die for him. You're jealous." After that, Wei Wei Bai kicked him away. Then she jumped into the sea without hesitation. The cold sea water buried her head and face. She couldn't breathe, and her chest and lungs were about to explode. When the darkness came, a figure like the god of the sea broke through the water and held her in his arms. Wei Wei Bai vaguely heard his words, "I'm poisoned." She didn't think much about it. She just remembered that mermaids needed to eat human flesh when they were poisoned, so she generously said it. "Then you eat me?" Ding. The male lead's favorability is at 20. //. Crossover system. Adonis, come over here, comma. Chapter 673. Jumping into the water and swimming out would bring him to the depths of the ocean. While he was hesitating, he heard the sound of water splashing. Vic actually jumped into the water. His beautiful fishtail drew a circle in the air and disappeared into the water. Wei Wei Bai squatted alone in the cave. "Tongzi, he left me here and ran away by himself." The system said, "There's no other way. Now that the mermaid is in heat, he's basically irrational and only wants to have sex. But since you're not in heat, he thought you rejected him, so he went to find his little love fish. You've been eliminated by him." The habit of mermaids was to have sex more than their appetite. Once they were in heat, their minds would not be clear. They would look for the nearest female mermaid to mate. Because of animal instinct, during mating, the male mermaid would protect the female. If the female was not in heat, they would not mate. At that time, the mermaid would give up and look for other mermaids. Wei Wei Bai said, "After he's in heat, will he remember that I'm still here?" The system was silent for a moment. "No way. After he's in heat, he'll give birth to little mermaids. It's just a mere 20 points of affinity. He'll have long forgotten about the old, fleshy, and disgusting dumb human." After mating, the mermaid would not leave the female's side. Because the female could be pregnant, they had to protect her. Wei Wei Bai hugged the tattered clothes, shivering in the cold, and started crying. "It's so lonely and cold. Is this my burial place? I raised that stupid fish for nothing. How could he treat his old mother like this?" The system. Old mother. Wei Wei Bai covered his face and said sadly, "He doesn't want his wife. I gave birth to him and raised him, but he ran away with another fish. What a waste of my 20 years of hard work." The system. What's 20 years? Isn't it just a few days? Wei Wei Bai said, "Tongzi, my eldest son." The system said, "Stop your grandpa." "Who's your eldest son?" "I'm your ancestor." "This drama queen is not done yet, is she?" After the system stopped, Wei Wei Bai's expression changed. and he stared coldly at the water. In the cave, the atmosphere was as strange as the scene of a horror movie. The system shuddered. It would have been better for her to call him son. Wei Wei Bai thought for a while before she mustered up the courage to go into the water and see if she could swim out. His feet had just touched the cold water. The surface of the water rippled, and a black figure emerged from the water. Golden hair fluttered in the dark and cold water. Vic emerged from the water at once. He blinked his eyes, and the golden light in his eyes was resplendent. Water droplets rolled down from his beautiful muscles on his muscular body, as if a mythical sea god had suddenly appeared. He turned his head and looked at Wei Wei Bai. Her expressionless face was flushed with heat and excitement. He swam to the side of the rock, stretched out his hands, and carefully held a pile of beautiful shells and rare corals. Put it on the stone. There were also some human jewels in this pair of colorful objects. He was very uncomfortable and wanted to mate, but the female mermaid he liked was not in heat. He didn't know what to do. He had no choice but to follow the merfolk's habit of pleasing their mates and look for things that the female liked to please her. Wei Wei Bai squatted by the water and stared blankly at the pile of shells. So why did this mentally retarded fish find so many shells? Could they be eaten? Vic put his hand on the stone and rested his head on it. His beautiful face was full of unbearable desire. He swung his fishtail, the golden blue tail, lustrous and incredibly beautiful. Wei Wei Bai looked at him indifferently. Finally, she tried to reach out, but instead of taking the shell, she gently touched his hair. Chapter 674. Wake, bear with it. Wait until the estrus is over. Then you'll be fine. She had just communicated with the system. Merfolk's first estrus period was the shortest. It would pass in 2 or 3 hours. And the venom of the bullet in his body had begun to fade. Wake's body was stronger than any other merfolk, so the bullet venom was effective against ordinary merfolk. He only needed a few hours of digestion to solve it. As for what Chinimo said, he had to eat human flesh. It also referred to ordinary merfolk. Wake thought she agreed. His tail wagged more cheerfully, his head raised so that she could touch his head more easily. His hair was long and beautiful. Other merfolk definitely couldn't compare to him. Wake sniffed the scent on her body. The soft fragrance stimulated him so much that his eyes were about to stand up. But there was no smell of estrus. Wake's ferocious temper appeared again. His teeth were about to show. Why wasn't she an estrus? Wasn't he beautiful? Wasn't he strong? Or was the smell of his estrus not good enough? Because she was soaked in seawater, Wei Wei Bai, whose nose was blocked and headache, couldn't smell the scent of the merfolk in estrus at all. It was like the ocean, deep but with a hot breath different from the ocean. It was as seductive as the merfolk song. It could make both humans and merfolk lose control. Wake thought about finding other merfolk. He even remembered that his song could attract the best female merfolk in the deepest part of the ocean. But he didn't know why. After he went out, he couldn't help but swim back. He liked her smell. Even if she wasn't an estrus, her skin was wrinkled and didn't look young. But he just liked it. He wanted her, not other merfolk. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 25. Wei Wei Bai had question marks on her head. Losing his mind could also increase favorability. Wake was getting more and more uncomfortable. His fingers pressed on the stone, and the stone cracked. He suddenly roared at Wei Wei Bai. His teeth had a terrible deterrent force. Merfolk who only had instincts were very scary. They could tear humans apart if they weren't careful. Wei Wei Bai didn't dare to move. She had no experience in dealing with mermaids who had lost their minds. To be precise, he had no experience in dealing with bestiality. Therefore, he could only take one step at a time. Wake could not hold on any longer. His body started to tremble. The gold color in his eyes was so dense that it was terrifying. Estrus, to this point, was a form of torture for the merfolk. They could mate even if they weren't in heat. She just couldn't give birth to a little mermaid. This memory flashed through Wake's mind, and his eyes became terrifying. He wanted to climb out of the water and capture her. When Wei Wei Bai saw his actions, she felt as if a terrifying crocodile had crawled out of the water to eat people. She cursed the system thousands of times in her mind. Her routine was completely useless here. What was the fish doing? Their brains were different from humans. and their past experience was completely useless. Wake seemed to feel her fear. He hesitated for a moment before he struggled to suppress his uncomfortable desire. Then, he used his limited brain to think before deciding to return to the water. If there were little mermaids, then this little female could only follow him. He liked her taste, so he had to snatch the position of her partner first. Merfolk also had a way of courtship, which could only be done to the partner they had recognized. It was different from those one-night stands. This kind of courtship was equivalent to a marriage proposal. He was hesitant at first, but she wasn't in heat, so he was anxious. / to facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 675. Wake's face flashed with anger, embarrassment, and suppressed discomfort. Suddenly, he looked up, and a trace of vigilance flashed in his eyes. But he saw Wei Bai trying to bypass the stones and come in front of him. She squatted down, looking a little embarrassed. Her eyes were loving and gentle as she reached out and put her hand to his lips. Drink some blood to detoxify. The venom in his body would take some time to detoxify. Wei Bai was afraid that he would be lured into estrus by the venom again, and there would be no end to it. A mermaid's second estrus was not something that could be completed in 2 hours. It was at least a day. Wake raised his cold eyes, full of focused scrutiny. Wei didn't have a guilty conscience. Instead, she calmly looked at him. Mermaids naturally did not trust humans, even if this human created him, who made mermaids and humans fight for so many years. Wake couldn't find any trace of malice or purpose in her eyes. He turned his head, his body lost strength, and could only lie down powerlessly. His eyes were gloomy, and even his fishtail had lost its beautiful luster. He looked like he was seriously ill. Wei Bai was still trying to persuade him. Wake, drink some. I'm worried about you. Wake's heart flashed with a few traces of malice. This woman kept saying that he was her dream. How far could she go for her dream? No matter how pure human beings were, their nature was vicious and selfish. There was no reason why only she could be good. He looked up, grinding his teeth, and his eyes flashed with a cold fierceness as he bit her wrist. Fresh blood poured into his lips and teeth. It made his body begin to recover its strength, and this feeling was terrible. Wei Bai's body trembled, purely out of fear. How could there be a sudden attack? Then there was pain, but this kind of pain for her. Compared to the severe pain that could easily kill her, it was at most kindergarten level. So she just frowned slightly, looking at him with a pale face, her eyes calm and gentle. Obviously, the blood was delicious, and his bloodthirsty impulse made him grab more. But when his teeth bit into her fragile wrist, his strength softened, and he didn't dare to bite deeper. Her blood was sweet in his mouth, but his heart was bitter. Wake saw that she still had a smile on her face. It was as if she was willing to suck his blood like this. Perhaps it was because of the blood, but her cold heart warmed up. He suddenly loosened his teeth. Seeing that her wrist was full of blood, he couldn't help but lower his head to lick it. The wound slowly healed. Wei Bai said, "Is it enough?" Wake bit his lips and heavily kissed her healed wrist. Then, his white and strong body dove into the water. She had golden hair and a beautiful fishtail that was faintly discernible in the water. He disappeared into the water. It seemed that she didn't want to face Wei Bai. Then, Wei Bai heard the system's notification. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 40. Mermaids did not trust humans. But once you start to trust, your feelings will become pure. Naturally, the favorability will increase easily. Wei Bai squatted by the water and looked at the water silently. Finally, she couldn't help but say, "Do you think I can catch fish?" System, what for? Wei Bai, I'm hungry. After tossing and turning for so long, not only was her head dizzy, she was also hungry. And she was also losing blood. And that stupid fish would disappear at every turn, even if the favorability increased. In her eyes, he was still retarded. Wei Bai couldn't catch fish and felt tired, so she leaned against the rock and fell asleep. Chapter 676. Rick, who was hiding in the water, dared to slowly come out. His cold and exquisite face revealed a helpless expression. He had just hidden himself like a coward. running away without a fight. But seeing her looking at him so gently, his heart was beating so fast that he had to hide in the water for fear that she would hear him. Wake approached her gently and couldn't help but reach out to touch her. Maybe humans also had some good ones. She was one. His fingers touched her face, and the soft and smooth feeling made him close his eyes comfortably. He lay on the side and looked at her. Even he didn't know how gentle his eyes were. When Wei Wei Bai woke up, she found herself sleeping in an enveloped sleeping bag, and the sound of a bonfire burning came from beside her. The cave was still the same cave. She opened her eyes in a daze and saw her wet clothes hanging by the bonfire. She was wearing a silk dress. When she woke up, everything was complete. Wei Wei Bai, Tongzi, did you do this? The system was eating instant noodles. When it heard the host's voice, it quickly hid the instant noodles behind it. I didn't really. Wei Wei Bai. After the system finished speaking, it realized that the host didn't find out that it was secretly eating. It was just about to change the topic. There was the sound of breaking water again. Wake walked out of the water, his upper body bare, wearing a pair of trousers, and walked out of the water in the appearance of a human. You're awake. His tone was still not very standard, but it was much more familiar than before. Wei Wei Bai half sat up and looked at him in confusion. Wake? Wake put the thing hanging in his hand by the bonfire. Then he took out the canned fish from it and easily cut it open with his fingernails. He was going to give it to Wei Wei Bai to eat. But did she like fish? Mermaids liked it. Humans didn't necessarily like it. Wake silently chose another can, and after cutting it open, he remembered that humans ate hot. He remembered the books he had read and followed suit, putting the can on the bonfire to roast. With his back to Wei Wei Bai, he looked like an adult man. Except for his long blonde hair, he didn't look like a mermaid at all. He had taken these things from the human ships when he surfaced from the sea. Humans were different from mermaids. Their customs, diets, and interests were all different. He didn't know what she liked, but he instinctively looked for human things to give her. Wei Wei Bai said, Vic, are you okay? When Wake heard her voice, his body went numb, as if he had been electrocuted. His body tensed up uncomfortably. After a long time, he finally said, yes. Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. That's good. Hearing her sincere words, Wake's body stiffened even more. When he saw her now, he felt awkward all over. He wanted to get close to her, but he also wanted to avoid her. This dilemma left him at a loss. The merfolk were the best warriors, and there was no hesitation at all. He looked like a useless human being, bashful and stupid. Wake's eyes darkened as he lowered his head uncomfortably. In the future, Wei Wei Bai, ? The system freely translated. In the future, you are mine. Wei Wei Bai, oh. Wake said laboriously. You like the sea? The system translated. Do you like the sea? Wei Wei Bai, who hadn't thought much about it, nodded. I like it. A trace of ecstasy flashed in Wake's eyes. He pursed his lips and pressed down the smile on his lips. As a male merfolk, he had to be calm and collected. Wake's tone lightened. I don't dislike you because you are a human. The sea is different from the land. I will try my best to give you a good living environment. T. Chapter 677. This sentence was too long, and he said it with difficulty and vagueness. As expected, Wei Wei Bai was at a loss. What language was this? The system calmly translated for the second time. I don't mind that you are an old, ugly, useless, and disgusting human. The sea is different from the ugly and dirty land you live on. It is your honor to live in the sea. Kneel down and accept the decree, old woman. Wei Wei Bai, MMP, is there really no problem with this translation? Why do I feel that the translated sentence is much longer? Wake turned his back, not daring to look back. He said with a cold face and a dry tone, the mermaid dance. You saw the king's courtship mermaid dance. No other mermaid dares to want you. Only I want you. I will take responsibility. This sentence was indeed too long. Wei Wei Bai's eyes went blank. What the hell is this talking about? The system translated. You peeked at my body when I wasn't paying attention. Wei Wei Bai, shut up. She didn't want to listen to the translation. The translation didn't have a single good word. She tried to calm down the anger in her body. and then showed a strategy, a standard warm smile. Her voice was sweet and light. Well, whatever Wake says, the strategy was to follow whatever he said. It was fine even if she didn't understand. It was fine as long as the favorability increased. Wei Bai gritted her teeth and thought that sooner or later, she would steam this fish. How was she old? She was in the prime of her life. Wake suddenly turned his head. He thought that she would hesitate, even for a second. But she didn't even hesitate. His eyes were still burning with the light of the bonfire, and the indifference on his face couldn't help but distort. He reached out and grabbed her arm. His ice blue eyes stared at her. He emphasized each word and said, "You are my partner." The sentence, maybe because he said it slowly, was particularly heavy and depressing, and it was very smooth. Wei Bai finally understood the sentence. Wake, partner? Did I miss something in the middle? How did it become a partner? Wake's eyes were burning as he waited for her response. Wei Bai had no reason to refuse, so she nodded. She was already a slave, so she didn't need the title of companion. And the partner that the mermaid was talking about might be a partner. When Wake saw her nod, his mind went blank for a moment. He thought that it was only because he had danced the courtship dance that he had to give her an explanation. But the moment she nodded, his brain seemed to explode with fireworks. It was like a hurricane or a tsunami. His calmness was easily shattered. Wake held her hand tightly. His lips and tongue were stuck together, and he couldn't speak. His muscles were so nervous that they kept trembling. In hindsight, he realized that he was ecstatic. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 50. Wei Bai couldn't help but say to the system, this favorability increase is a bit fast. With just a few sentences, the favorable impression points exploded into the sky as if they had eaten explosives. The main mission of the previous dimension was too easy to complete. In the end, he received a crazy side quest. As a result, Wei Bai now had a psychological shadow system. Anyway, whether it's fast or not, you can't reject the side quest, so it doesn't make a difference. Wei Bai thought about it. Indeed, it was a despairing realization. Wake's blue eyes turned to gold because of excitement. His cold, thin lips moved again. This time it was authentic mermaid language. It was ethereal, with a deep hoarseness. As if he was chanting, he said, "You can't betray me, or you will suffer the backlash of the ocean. You can't leave me, or you will be buried in the depths of the ocean forever. You can't go back on your promise to form a contract with me, or I will forever lock you in the abyss 30,000 meters below, so that you will never see the light of the sun." This was the curse from the Mermaid King. Wake looked at her ignorant soft eyes. Her eyes were clear and pure as she looked at him, without any defense against him. She didn't know that he was cursing her. The curse from the Mermaid King would accompany her forever. Once she tried to leave, she would be cursed and stay in the ocean forever. / comma. Chapter 678. Wei Bai heard him say a lot of things and couldn't help but knock on the translation machine. The translation machine was simple and neat. "Don't try to run, or I'll break your legs." Wei Bai. Isn't this translation too short? And she couldn't run now, even if she wanted to. This cave in the sea, without the guidance of a mermaid, she couldn't get out at all. Wake saw her pursing her bright red lips, her eyelashes covering her eyes, casting a shadow under her eyes, as if she was thinking about something. Although she didn't know the curse and didn't understand the language of mermaids. But Wake still felt guilty. Because the curse was a terrible thing, no one would use it on someone close to them. His ice blue eyes, like the sea surface blown by a breeze, floated a few glimmers. Maybe it was to reduce this sense of guilt. He reached out, passed through her long hair, and held her face. Then he lowered his head, his eyes dark with gold, and whispered a few words on her white neck. These were the words to remove the slave mark. Then he gently swept over her like a feather and kissed her slave mark. The mark slowly faded. Wei Bai didn't dare to move, thinking of Wake's sharp teeth, for fear that he would bite off her neck if he used force. Wake made sure that the mark was gone, and then showed a relieved smile. Then he let go of her and handed the warm food to Wei Bai. Wei Bai was so hungry that she was about to faint. She ate whatever Wake gave her. It didn't matter if it was a little burnt. Wake watched her eat in small bites, and a doting smile flashed in his eyes. The system felt like it saw the daily life of a cat and a poop picker. As the one being fed, its host had no sense of shame at all and ate very happily. So the system also learned from the host's thick skin, secretly took out the half-barrel of instant noodles that it had hidden, and carefully ate. Don't make a sound, so as not to be heard. After eating, it was time to rest. As a male mermaid, because he had a partner, his instinctive genes were stimulated. For example, protecting their mate, giving their mate the best cave, and giving her the most beautiful shells and corals were the most basic things that a male should do. Although Vic was a mermaid who came out of a culture tank, he had never seen how a mermaid treated his female in reality. But the memories gave him a lot of guidance, including the marriage ceremony. They had to go to a special location, find the mermaid sorcerer, and complete the marriage ceremony. Only then could they mark each other as partners. This was different from humans. Human marriage certificates were held together by a weak sense of trust and morality. As for the merfolk's marriage mark, it would accompany them for a lifetime, in life and death. If one side betrayed the other side could punish them. Vic couldn't wait to mark her with his mate's mark. Wei Wei Bai was tidying up her clothes. She felt that she would not stay in this place for too long. He would definitely get rheumatism if he stayed in such a humid place for too long. Suddenly, she heard the sound of water splashing. She looked up and saw that Vic had turned back into a merman. His tall and slender body was submerged in the water. His beautiful blue eyes were looking at her deeply. "I will come back." He stammered this sentence, barely speaking smoothly. Wei Wei Bai nodded with a smile. "I'll wait for you." Vic's throat moved. His expression was indescribably happy. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 55. Wei Wei Bai shivered. This was abnormal. The favorability was rising so fast. She felt like she was going to be struck by lightning in the next second. Vic disappeared in the water. Slash. Chapter 679. Wei Wei Bai asked the system in fear. "I must have miscalculated. The speed of the increase in favorability is not normal. It's different from the previous increases in favorability. In the past, if there were no major changes, favorability would not fluctuate so easily." The system said, "I didn't miscalculate." It flipped through its database and also felt that the favorability was increasing too quickly. Originally, it was very difficult to conquer the target of this plane. Mermaids saw humans as mortal enemies. How could it be that easy to increase favorability? As it flipped through, it suddenly saw Yi Yuxuan's folder. The system's mouth twitched. Damn, the effect of the plane barrier on the Chosen One was getting weaker and weaker. It looked deeply at the clueless Wei Wei Bai. It hid the folder even deeper. No wonder the favorability was increasing so quickly. It was because the emotional fragments that belonged to Yi Yuxuan seemed to resonate with Yi Yuxuan. This also explained why the dream barrier started to lose its effect on Yi Yuxuan. The system's face was gloomy. There was nothing good in the warehouse that could stop Yi Yuxuan, who was getting stronger. If this went on, one day Yi Yuxuan would explode. It could not control it. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said softly, "Tongzi, we've known each other for so long. Just tell me the truth. You're not hiding anything from me, right?" She had been suspicious for a long time. The system trembled and almost shook out Yi Yuxuan. Its facial muscles twitched and its voice trembled. Wei Wei Bai was on full alert. She narrowed her eyes coldly. "What are you hiding from me?" The system finally confessed. "I ate 2 bowls of instant noodles. Because there was a discount, I couldn't help but buy one for free." Wei Wei Bai gritted her teeth. "How much life points do you have, you wastrel?" The system said, 3 days. Wei Wei Bai said, "Will you die if you don't eat?" The system was silent for a while, then said pitifully, "Yes." The system did need to eat, but it did not dare to eat too much. Before it was bound to Wei Wei Bai, any snack would cost more than 100 life points. Wei Wei Bai, she could not reply. Poverty made us unrecognizable. In the end, Wei Wei Bai sighed, "Then eat less. You'll be stuck in the door if you're too fat." The system said obediently, "Okay." The system and love suddenly showed a fake smile at the same time. "Bai Wei Wei, Such an obedient, lowly slag stem. I feel like there's a trick system. The host is so easily fooled. Something's not right. After a while, he came out of the sea. He held a pearl clam in his hand and carefully handed it to Bai Weiwei. Bai Weiwei took a look curiously. Inside, there was a pearl shining with a rainbow Mary Sue light. Wake picked up the pearl and motioned for Bai Weiwei to lower her head. Weiwei Bai did not think much of it. Just as she lowered her head, the pearl was stuffed into her mouth. It rolled down her throat and into her stomach. Weiwei Bai, I feel like I'm having indigestion. Wei Bai watched her eat and stretched out his strong hands. Come down. Weiwei Bai knew that he just meant to leave. Her feet touched the water, and she was about to go down. Wake, however, quickly swam to her side and gently held her feet so that she could borrow his strength to lightly fall into the water and directly into his embrace. Weiwei Bai was held by him. He could not help but put his face close to her hair. Because it was soaked in seawater, there was a damp smell of the sea. This smell was attractive to mermaids. Wei Bai closed his eyes comfortably and then plunged into the water. Weiwei Bai was ready to choke on the water, but when she entered the water, she found that the cold water was warm. /mobile Chapter 680. And she could breathe and even look at the seawater with her eyes open, without any pressure or barrier from the water. Weiwei Bai blinked. She could clearly touch the water, but she felt as comfortable as if she was on land. The rainbow pearl she ate just now had such an effect. Wake took her and swam out of the cave. In the deep sea, all kinds of fish swarmed over. Above their heads were a group of sharks, but when Wake came, the sharks fled in fear. Wake didn't care about this. He hugged her. His strong body and elegant fishtail broke through the pressure of the sea. He kept swimming deeper and deeper. It was getting darker and darker. The sun gradually left them. Weiwei Bai, who could vaguely see something, suddenly felt her scalp go numb. A huge underwater abyss appeared. The abyss was terrifyingly dark and bottomless, as if they were going to enter hell. Weiwei Bai couldn't help but hug Wake. It was the first time she knew that she had a phobia of the deep sea. Wake felt her trembling. He lowered his head and saw her closing her eyes tightly, pressing her face against his chest. This feeling of dependence made his eyes darken. He softly sang a few lines of a song. In the cold and dark sea, there were huge white jellyfish emitting light. They appeared in groups. They were like dandelions blooming on the dark land. The beauty was strange and dreamy. He said softly, Weiwei. This name, when spoken in human language, sounded gentle and smooth. He kept it in his mouth, afraid that this name would melt. Weiwei Bai opened her eyes and saw the sea full of glowing jellyfish. It was the first time she saw such a beautiful underwater world. The abyss was not so scary. The entire underwater abyss was filled with white jellyfish light. Wake's cold and exquisite face couldn't help but reveal a doting smile. His hand gently stroked her hair, and then he accelerated his swimming speed, plunging into the abyss of the sea. Weiwei Bai didn't know how long she had been swimming, but a strange underwater world appeared. Countless fish of all shapes and sizes swam in schools. And under the fish, a huge city appeared. Unlike human cities, this city looked colorful and was filled with houses built with different colors of coral reefs. The houses were also round, flat, tall, and all kinds of shapes. Just as Vic was about to swim over, a large group of mermaids of various colors rushed over. The leader looked a little old, with long gray hair and a wrinkled face. When he saw Vic, his face flashed with joy. Then, he immediately lowered his head and stretched out his hands in a gesture of submission. All the mermaids instantly submitted. Wake's expression turned cold. He was like a high and mighty emperor. His words were like orders. Mermaid, prepare the best dark sorcerer. I want to get married. The leader raised his head in shock, then looked at the person in his arms. Human? He said with trembling lips, Your Majesty, this is a human. Wake's thin lips were like a knife, slowly evoking a sharp sneer. He looked at him coldly. The pressure of the Mermaid King made these mere people instinctively tremble. Even if Vic ordered them to die at this moment, They could only follow his orders and commit suicide. All the mermaids began to tremble, not daring to raise their heads to look at him. Vic softly spat out a word, "Get lost." All the mermaids turned around and quickly left. Vic then took Wei Wei Bai into the city. Then he put her in a super large pearl clam and said in human language with difficulty, "Wait for me. / collect below to record this reading record." Chapter 681. Wei Wei Bai was still in a daze, but he had already turned and left. Less than a minute after he left, her pearl muscle was surrounded by a bunch of mermaids. They looked at Wei Wei Bai with hostility, as if they were looking at a piece of braised pork, as if they wanted to stuff her into their mouths. Wei Wei Bai thought about the fights between humans and mermaids. She hugged her knees, surrounded by mermaids who hated her. She felt like a little cabbage that accidentally entered a lion's den. No matter how she looked at it, it didn't feel right. Wei Wei Bai said, "Tongzi, this group of mermaids looks like they want to eat me." Although humans were not in the mermaids' diet, they were not picky when necessary. The system said, "They don't look like they want to eat you, but they already plan to eat you." As soon as the system finished speaking, a stunningly beautiful mermaid came in front of Wei Wei Bai. Her clear eyes were filled with frost. She raised her head and snorted coldly. The system calmly translated, "Human, get back to where you came from, or I will kill you." Wei Wei Bai said excitedly to the system, "Is this a jealous female antagonist online?" System, "Why are you so excited, host?" Wei Wei Bai said, "How long has it been since I saw a woman go against me? I miss it so much." After so many worlds, she finally saw a woman who came to fight for a man. Wei Wei Bai adjusted her state. She looked up casually, her eyes cold and mocking, the corners of her mouth slightly curved, her delicate face suddenly showing traces of coldness. She reached out her white fingers and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Then she said gently, "Yo, your man likes me. What can I do? I am also very desperate." The mermaid could also understand human language. She was stunned. Maybe it was because she had never seen a woman who could say such shameless words. Her eyes were burning with anger. She suddenly said in human language, "You are not worthy of our king." Wei Wei Bai smiled and suddenly came down from the pearl clam. She walked in front of the mermaid and raised her beautiful chin with a finger. "You don't know, do you? It was your family's king that cried and begged me to be with him. I don't want to either. There are so many men who like me. Why should I be with a fish like him?" Shock flashed through the mermaid's eyes. "No, impossible." Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows. "Why? Haven't you seen a woman as popular as me? I don't blame you for being ignorant." System, "Look at how bitchy she is. The host is the standard evil supporting female lead. Come online." The mermaid's eyes turned cold. She raised her fingers in anger, and her sharp nails were about to tear this reckless human into pieces. Wei Wei Bai calculated the timing and fell backwards awkwardly. She fell into the soft pearl muscle and scathed. Then she saw a tall figure appear behind the mermaid. His fingers firmly grasped the mermaid's hand, and his ice blue eyes flashed with anger. Wei Wei Bai saw him and immediately put on a posture of being pushed and bullied. She looked at him weakly. Wake's face turned cold. His cold nails directly cut through the mermaid's wrist, crippling her entire arm. He then threw her aside. System, "I feel like I'm watching an old soap opera where the female lead is bullied by the evil supporting female lead." Wei Wei Bai, "I haven't seen a man-stealing woman come online for a long time. I'm so excited. I can't control myself when I'm excited. Let's play the role of a white lotus." The system was silent for a while before saying, "These days, no one would be fooled." Wei Wei Bai nodded. "Of course. It's so old-fashioned. Those who would be fooled would be stupid." The is at https://m/sashu.com// the button at the bottom to record your reading record. Chapter 682. It was so obvious that she was pretending to be bullied. How blind would one have to be to think that it was the mermaid's fault? Just as she was thinking this, Wake's cold voice sounded with a bit of hoarseness. "When I wasn't here, you bully my wife like this. You even dared to push her down? Execute her. System. Fuck, the male lead is actually blind. Even if the Mermaid King was blind, once the order was given, it couldn't be changed. So it was rare for someone to come online to steal a man. So it was just a death sentence? Then he walked in front of Wei Wei Bai, and his expression suddenly softened. He reached out to pick her up and walked out. Wei Wei Bai didn't understand the mermaid language and didn't see what happened to the mermaid, so she was carried away by him and left the scene. He held her weak body tightly, his heart beating fiercely. It felt like even his blood was boiling. He heard her words. She was jealous of him and went tit for tat with the other mermaids. Even when he saw her clumsily frame others, the ecstasy in his heart couldn't be suppressed. Even when he heard her say that he was begging for her life or something, he felt very happy. Because she cared about him, she fought for him. To steal the partner they liked, they all fought and framed each other. She liked him. Ding. The male lead's favorability is at 60. Wei Wei Bai. The favorability rose so casually, her heart was flustered. Wei Wei Bai was carried into a coral cave, where a black mermaid was waiting. Wake couldn't wait to put her down. Then he grabbed her finger, lowered his head, and bit it. Beads of blood oozed out. The blood dripped into the black mermaid's palm. Then Wake also dripped his own blood on it. The two drops of blood floated up and merged into one, turning into a complex pattern. The black mermaid put the pattern in Wei Wei Bai's hand, and it merged into her skin and disappeared. Wake also caught the same pattern. The black mermaid said, "The contract is complete." Wake's deep and delicate eyebrows softened, and he showed a stunning smile. A hurried and simple wedding contract ceremony. Before he completed it, he didn't know how flustered his heart was. He was afraid that she would run away. Wei Wei Bai finally had the time to ask the system, "What is this?" The system said, "The marriage contract." Wei Wei Bai. So, she married a fish so casually? Wake's cold and delicate face was filled with the light of happiness because of the gentle smile. He kissed her forehead and said to her in the mermaid's language, "I'll take you to the mermaid's heart to be baptized." This way, she could become a mermaid and be with him forever. Wei Wei Bai couldn't understand what he was saying, but she heard the voice of the side quest. Ding, please complete the mermaid's heart research project. Steal the mermaid's heart and return to the mainland to study the secrets of the mermaid's heart. Before you complete the side mission, you are not allowed to complete the main mission. Also, you must ensure that your affinity with the main mission does not exceed 65. Side mission failed. Host, please happily appear 10,000 meters under the sea and be crushed into a meat patty without any protective measures. Wei Wei Bai. Wake was very excited and immediately ran to the mermaid's heart with her in his arms. But that place was full of mermaid guards. A noble mermaid had been waiting there for a long time. He was almost lying on the ground. "Your Majesty, humans can't go in. The mermaid's heart is the support point of the ocean. If something happens, we're finished." Wake's footsteps paused. His ice-blue eyes were calm and full of coldness. His voice was ethereal and cold. "I believe her. She is my wife." The noble said, "Please, Your Majesty, humans can't be trusted." Wake's eyes softened. "I believe her. If something happens to the mermaid's heart, I will take all the responsibility." After that, he carried Wei Wei Bai into the most important holy place of the mermaids. The place where the mermaid's heart was placed. No human could enter here. Wei Wei Bai was the first one. Address of the full text. https://www.sashu.com. Download address of the collect below to record this reading record. Quick comma. Chapter 683. Wei Wei Bai was still digesting the information about the mermaid's heart. She didn't understand the mermaid's language at all, and she had never heard of the mermaid's heart. Wake took her hand and walked to a dark blue sea. He looked up and waved his hand casually. A huge shadow appeared above his head. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but look up. A huge blue whale swam slowly. Wake picked up Wei Wei Bai, swung his fishtail, and swam up to the back of the blue whale. The blue whale sped up and swam through a complicated sea area to the central area. All kinds of strange undersea plants grew. The blue whale cried, and Wake said to Wei Wei Bai, "Wait for me." Wei Wei Bai stared blankly at the information about the mermaid's heart. Her mind was blank. She just nodded instinctively and showed a perfunctory smile. When Wake jumped down from the blue whale and plunged deeper into the sea, she finally couldn't help but explode at the system. Did this side quest eat arsenic? Is it trying to poison me to death? What was the mermaid's heart? It was the support point of the mermaid empire. If it was taken away, there would be a big earthquake here in minutes. To put it bluntly, it was to calm the sea. Once it was taken away, there would be a big riot. Even if it could be taken away, what was the secret? If there were 10,000 secrets in the mermaid's heart, would she die of old age in the plane? No, it seemed that she didn't need to die of old age. She would die in a few months. Wei Wei Bai's fingers were trembling. She felt that these planes, whether it was the favorability or the side quest, they were all screwed up. Her past experience was useless. The system was silent for a moment before saying, "The side quest will automatically adjust its difficulty. When it feels that it should be difficult, it will be especially difficult." Wei Wei Bai gritted her teeth. When it should be difficult, how difficult is it? There must be a standard. The system's tone was angry. How would I know what the main neurotic system is thinking? If it wants to raise the difficulty level, it can do so. If it doesn't want to raise the difficulty level, it can also let you sing a song to pass. Wei Wei Bai, I think we'll die in the mission sooner or later. What kind of damn mission was this? The system blurted out. You definitely won't die. Wei Wei Bai's eyes narrowed. She felt that there was something wrong with this sentence. Her expression instantly turned cold. 004? Do you really have confidence in me? Why was he so sure that she wouldn't die? She wasn't even sure. Even after running around for his life every day, he only managed to earn 100 days' worth of HP. Every time she tried, she felt like she was going to die at any moment. She could only hold on, not daring to say that she was tired or afraid. He was afraid that if he stopped, the mission would fail. Failure equaled death. This formula had always been deeply rooted in her heart. No one could always succeed. She was also afraid that she would fail one day. As soon as the words left the system's mouth, it wanted to smash its own mouth. It was extremely nervous, but its tone was calm. You have so little confidence in yourself. You're the host that I chose. And even if this mission fails, you can still return to reality. With 100 days worth of HP, you'll have a chance to continue to transmigrate to the next mission. You definitely won't die. Wei Wei Bai's tone was perplexed. Really? The system emphasized each word. I won't let you die. If you don't believe in yourself, don't you believe in me? Wei Wei Bai's eyes were dead fish. I don't. The system was completely disheartened. It suddenly cried like a fat system that weighed more than 20,000 pounds. It had finally dug out its lungs and heart for its dead host, but now its heart was in pain. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. The is at https://m/sashu.com/. Chapter 684. Wei Wei Bai sighed. Forget it, forget it. I'll take pity on you and trust you this time. System. What's with this tone of giving alms to beggars? It's too perfunctory. But at least it was fooled. The blue whale cried again. A burst of brilliant blue light bloomed from the sea below the blue whale. Wei Wei Bai frowned and looked down. She saw a transparent bead the size of a pigeon egg floating up. Vic's voice came from below. Take hold it. Wei Wei Bai reached out, and the weightless, beautiful crystal bead came into her hand. The information about the mermaid's heart appeared in her mind. The mermaid's heart was placed in the center of the empire's Eye of the Sea. The Eye of the Sea was dangerous and dark. Only the most powerful mermaids would dare to enter. Mermaids would not touch the mermaid's heart either. Not being able to touch it was one thing, but the most important thing was that after the mermaid's heart was taken out, the empire would start to experience earthquakes. They could not bear such a loss. If they wanted to take out the mermaid's heart, they would need something as powerful as it to suppress the Eye of the Sea. Something as powerful as that. Wei Wei Bai looked down and found that Vic was standing in the middle of the sea. His golden hair fluttered in the water. His delicate and three-dimensional features were calm and gentle, like a god of the sea. He was standing in the middle of the most terrifying and deep eye of the sea, and could be pulled down by the torrents below at any time. He was not frightened at all, and did not move. The system looked as well. The male lead is very powerful. He is now replacing the mermaid's heart to suppress the entire eye of the sea. Wei Wei Bai said, "Do you think that if we take the mermaid's heart and run now, he will chase after us?" The system said, "Once he chases, the earthquake in the sea will come. He probably won't chase after us." Wei Wei Bai held the bead and thought for a while. Then this is the best opportunity. Once this opportunity was missed, the side mission would basically be declared a failure. It would be impossible to find another opportunity like this to take the mermaid's heart in the future. The system thought for a moment and nodded. Yes, this is the best opportunity. The two of them reached an agreement, and then lowered their heads to look at the mermaid standing below. Wake stood in the middle of the eye of the sea. His body was floating. He gently raised his slender neck and looked at Wei Wei Bai. The mermaid's heart could make wishes. As long as Wei Wei Bai made a wish to become a mermaid, she could be with him forever. From now on, they would live happily ever after in the sea. Wake pursed his lips with some restraint, but his eyes were filled with a happy smile. He whispered the incantation from his ancient memories. Only the king knew the incantation to activate the mermaid's heart's wish function. Wei Wei Bai heard a special language. It was not a human language, but it sounded directly in her mind. "Make a wish, and I will fulfill it." Below, Wake said with difficulty, "Merfolk, change, become a mermaid." This was the wish he asked her to make. Wei Wei Bai held the mermaid's heart and sat on the back of the whale. Her skin was originally clean, and it looked even more crystal clear in the water. She looked down at him lightly and suddenly said, "Wake, I'm sorry, I don't want to stay in the sea. Let's break up." This sentence was as sharp as a knife. It pierced Wake's heart in an instant. He didn't feel any pain for a while, but looked at her somewhat helplessly, as if he couldn't understand her words. // Chapter 685. Wake blinked. His blue eyes were full of confusion. Wei Wei Bai held up the mermaid's heart, bowed her head, and leaned her forehead against the bead. A beautiful blue light enveloped her, and she softly made her wish, "Please come back to the land with me. Please come back to the land with me." Wake's blue eyes turned gold because of the sudden emotional outburst. His power immediately stirred up the sea. Back to the land, she didn't want him anymore. The mermaid's eyes turned terrifying and desolate. He looked at Wei Wei Bai and roared in human language. "Stay, stay, Wei Wei." Only her name, he could always call out smoothly. Wei Wei Bai wanted to look back, but a white light flashed in front of her eyes, and she and the bead had disappeared on the back of the huge whale. In the cold sea, a powerful force swept up. Those streams of water risked their lives to break through the enormous pressure and continued to rush upwards. They wanted to catch the mermaid's bride. Wake felt the heart-wrenching pain. He stretched out his finger, wanting to leave the eye of the sea directly. But when he walked out, the earthquake in the sea began. Wake's eyes flashed with crazy anger. He looked fiercely at the sea. Wei Wei Bai had already disappeared. Only the whale was left. Wake's eyes turned cold and terrifying, his expression extremely distorted. He raised his finger, and the sea turned into countless sharp blades, tearing the whale into pieces. The cold blood spread in the fiercely surging sea. In the blood red, his expression was extremely ferocious. He retreated into the eye of the sea, and the earthquake immediately stopped. In the depths of the dark eye of the sea, the cold and dark sea swept his slender and strong body. Wake kept replaying the scene in his mind when she said they would break up. Was it all a lie to him? Saying that he was her dream, that she liked mermaids. Was it all a lie to him? Wake's golden eyes were stained by the Black Sea. The betrayal was very painful, but what made him completely desperate was she left him. Wake stood in the darkness and suddenly laughed softly. The laughter got louder and louder, and finally became extremely mournful. The ocean became ferocious. The king's heart-wrenching pain caused the entire ocean to become restless. Betraying him was equivalent to betraying the entire ocean. She couldn't run. She couldn't run anywhere. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 55. 50. Wei Wei Bai appeared at her house with the mermaid's heart in her hands. The beautiful bead rolled around in her hand. Then she heard the sound of the favorability dropping. Wei Wei Bai felt that this time it would drop to 0. In the end, the favorability stopped at 50. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while before saying, "This favorability is really tenacious." The system said, "While the male lead is still stuck in the eye of the sea, hurry up and figure out the secret. Then we can go and attack and come back." Wei Wei Bai grasped the blue bead and nodded. In the end, before she could study it, the door to her house was kicked open shortly after she returned home. Chun Mo's face was wrapped up like a dumpling. He limped in with a crutch, followed by a few bodyguards. When he saw her, his eyes lit up like a wolf's. "I saw that you were back on the monitor. I specially came to arrest you, the traitor who was with the mermaid." Wei Wei Bai looked Chun Mo up and down. She said to the system, "Based on my experience of dealing with multiple people, I feel that this guy, Chun Mo, is interested in me." The system flipped through the information. Chun Mo, favorability is at 95. To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click Save at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 686. Wei Wei Bai was shocked. What? 95? What did that mean? They had gone through thick and thin together. She thought that Vic's favorability had increased fast enough. But what was up with this guy's favorability? What did she do to get 95? Chun Mo limped in and smiled. "What's wrong? Where's your mermaid? Did she abandon you?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him in disbelief, her eyes full of doubt. Chun Mo stopped and avoided her eyes, then sneered. "You don't know how many surveillance cameras I've installed in your house. As long as you dare to come back, I'll catch you." Wei Wei Bai had already put the beads in her pocket. Then she reached out her hands and handed them to Chun Mo. "For you." Chun Mo saw her slender wrists, white and delicate. His brain couldn't process it. "For me," Wei Wei Bai said calmly. "You're not going to catch me. Where are the handcuffs? Lock me up." Chun Mo gripped the crutch tightly and said with a smile, "Such rules. I thought you'd keep running." Wei Wei Bai looked at him with a strange look in her eyes. Chun Mo held his breath and avoided her eyes again. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai took a few steps forward and approached him. Chun Mo's cold smile was a bit stiff, but he didn't show any special emotions. "Chun Mo, I'm tired," Wei Wei Bai said softly. Her voice actually had a hint of sweetness. This kind of sweetness seemed unconscious, but it could stir people's hearts. She smiled. "So can you be considerate of a colleague who almost died at sea and finally came back?" Chun Mo said stubbornly. "You're in cahoots with the mermaid." Wei Wei Bai turned around to get her clothes as if nothing had happened, then walked to the bathroom door, turned around and said to him, "I'm going to take a shower. You can wait if you want." With that, Wei Wei Bai took her clothes into the bathroom and closed the door. She had a favorability of 95. She could even die. As for where did the 95 points of favorability come from? This question was too profound. Wei Wei Bai expressed that she couldn't understand. Seeing her enter the bathroom, Chun Mo turned around awkwardly. He felt that she had seen through him. His lips trembled slightly as he used his walking stick to chase away the bodyguards who had come to the door. Scram, scram, scram. All of you are going back. He thought that by scaring her, she would be afraid to beg for mercy. In the end, the plan was completely wrong. When he heard the sound of running water from the bathroom, he blushed and immediately walked out, closing the door behind him for Wei Wei Bai. After Wei Wei Bai finished showering, she saw that 95 was gone. His favorable impression of her was really high. This meant that he was going to let her go. She didn't care. She laid down flat, pulled the blanket over her, and closed her eyes to sleep. Tomorrow, she would start to get busy. It was not easy to study the secret of the mermaid's heart. While she was asleep, the water stains in the bathroom began to slowly condense. Transparent water droplets condensed into streams of water and crawled out of the door as if they were alive. Slowly, it came to the side of the bed, The transparent water was like a tentacle. It wanted to touch her toes that were exposed outside the quilt. But halfway through, it didn't have enough strength and fell back to the ground. In the deep sea, Wake, who had closed his eyes tightly, suddenly opened his eyes. There was a deep darkness in his eyes, which made him look exceptionally fierce. Then he smiled coldly and closed his eyes again. Soon, when he got out of the eye of the sea, he would be able to catch her back. He wanted to lock her in the abyss 30,000 meters below and never be able to return to the land. The expression on Wake's cold face became cruel and ferocious. He would not let her see the sun again, nor would he give her a second chance to betray him. Collect below to record this reading record. Chapter 687. Wei Wei Bai became a busy researcher again. Chun Mo said that he wanted to catch her, but in the end, he was a coward. He even knew that she wanted a research lab, so he specially opened one for her. But he kept mocking and ridiculing her behind her back every day, often threatening that she had a criminal record and could be suspended at any time. If she didn't tightly cling to his golden thigh, she would be caught and sentenced. Wei Wei Bai said coldly, "Following me every day like this, those who don't know would think that you like me." Chun Mo was slapped in the face by this sentence and immediately stopped for a few days. He didn't dare to appear beside Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai was busy studying that lousy mermaid's heart and didn't have time to care about the strategy. Vic should still be in the eye of the sea. If she could complete the side quest as soon as possible, there was still a chance to get the favorability back. If she couldn't, Wei Wei Bai remembered the day she came. That big pool of blood and corpses. She always felt that her end wouldn't be good. The system didn't add insult to injury, but was busy collecting information on the mermaid's heart. This side quest was crazy to the point of fuck it. The system sometimes wondered if the main system found something, which was why it was jumping around like this. Wei Wei Bai was still the best mermaid research expert. She was afraid that the mermaid's heart would be discovered, so she used the excuse of creating another mermaid king to fool the people in the laboratory. A mermaid king had been born, although it was judged to have failed because of murder. But it was indeed the most perfect mermaid in the laboratory. Wei Wei Bai studied the mermaid's heart. The system began to study how to make a mermaid be born. It didn't matter if it was a mermaid king in the end. As long as it was a mermaid, it was fine as long as it could fool people. Although the system was reliable for a while, it didn't catch her every day to ridicule her. She was still tired. Not everyone could be a scientist. Wei Wei Bai was such a hard-working person, but she was almost out of breath under the pressure of the workload. As a result, when they reached home, Guyu was lying on the sofa like a dead fish, barely hanging on to life. She complained, "Slagstem, give me a more leisurely identity next time. If this goes on, I'm going to die from overwork." The system said, "Ding, your family's handsome, gentle, elegant, handsome, tall, and smart little cutie babies have all temporarily left. If there's an emergency, please shout, 'I love Marshall 004 3 times and I'll be back.'" Wei Wei Bai. How did it come up with such a shameful line? "Where's your face?" His face was bigger than the universe. Wei Wei Bai then remembered that the system wanted to go back to the system library to look up information about the mermaid's heart. He would leave for a while. After so many planes, it was rare for the system to leave her. Bai Weiwei felt empty, cold, and cheerless. It felt too good. That damn system finally disappeared for a while. She felt as if the whole world had brightened up. Who would be willing to have a non-stop ding, ding, ding sound on their forehead every day? Wei Wei Bai happily went to get her clothes. She wanted to take a bath and then have a good sleep. After filling the bathtub with water, Wei Wei Bai entered the water. She leaned her head on the bathtub and closed her eyes to think about the strategy. She could only pray that Vic was still in the eye of the sea. Otherwise, he would probably climb up to take revenge on her. In the information about mermaids in her mind, it said that mermaids were very vengeful creatures, and their means of revenge were very cruel. Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://www.sashu.com. Download the full article. https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 688. Wei Wei Bai tried hard to recall the scene just now. After a moment of silence, she said, "This human language is too good. When she left the ocean, didn't that stupid fish only know how to speak one word at a time? But today, when he spoke the human language, he was even more fluent than her." Also, Wei Wei Bai rubbed her red cheeks. "This is so uncomfortable." She ran away halfway, not afraid of her endocrine disorder. The system had just returned to see its host lying on the bed, looking like she was about to ascend to heaven. "What's wrong? Did you miss me?" Wei Wei Bai said, "Why aren't you dead if I miss you?" The system whimpered, "You dead person, you're so cruel." Wei Wei Bai. Every time she thought that the system had reached its limit of disgusting her, it would always come up with a way to disgust her even more. Wei Wei Bai rubbed her temples. "There's a problem. Can Vic control water?" The system said, "He can as long as he completely awakens the ability of the Mermaid King." Wei Wei Bai said, "I don't think I should take a shower. If he did this every time she took a shower, she would be killed sooner or later." The system said, "Why don't you take a shower? It's not like the male lead can appear through your water pipe and come to you." Wei Wei Bai was silent. Then the system was silent as well. At the bottom of the sea, in the deepest eye of the sea, the violent water flow stirred up and a tall figure appeared. His eyes were colder than the darkness in the eye of the sea. He didn't have enough strength. He looked at his hand and thought of the softness he had just touched. He slowly closed his eyes and continued to recharge. The power to control water could make him appear anywhere in this world as an incarnation of water. But this required a huge amount of strength. He still couldn't hold on for too long, and the eye of the sea needed him. This was the price he had to pay for trusting humans. No, it was the price he had to pay for trusting her. The system flipped through the information on the mermaid's heart. Because there are too many planes, the information on each plane is incomplete. The library only has a portion of the plane's information. Wei Wei Bai was already flipping through the information. The mermaid's heart, the mermaid's heart. She repeated it several times and finally saw the information about the mermaid's heart. The fragmented information was all about the ancient information of the mermaid's heart. The origin of the mermaid's heart was the heart of the Mermaid King. That heart required both great sorrow and strong love to form. This was the story of the king of the mermaid's heart. When he was young, he saved a princess in a storm and put her on the beach. The prince from the neighboring country had just arrived, and the princess opened her eyes, thinking that it was the prince who had saved her. She fell for him at first sight. The merfolk watched from afar, but did not dare to approach. But he had already fallen in love with the princess. Wait, why does this story sound so familiar? Wei Wei Bai's cold face finally couldn't take it anymore. What kind of stupid information is this? Even if you want to make things up, you can't just use some random fairy tale to trick me. Wasn't this Andersen's fairy tale of the Little Mermaid? Even a 3-year-old child would have heard of it. The system said, "Let's not be so calculative. What do you think after reading this story?" Wei Wei Bai flipped through it again and again. What could she think? Did she need to write an 800-word review for this kind of kindergarten bedtime story? Could it be that the rest of the story was different? Wei Wei Bai patiently read on. / Chapter 689. The mermaid went to the black wizard to ask for leg-splitting medicine, lost his voice, and walked as if he was walking on the tip of a knife. Then he went to the land to find the princess. The princess didn't notice him at all, and the next day he jumped into the sea and became the mermaid's heart. Damn, do you have to be so tricked thinking that the bubble became the mermaid's heart? Was this an original work? This didn't even need to make up nonsense, just copy and paste. Wei Wei Bai was so angry that her hands were shaking. "This is the information you found?" System. Wei Wei Bai said in despair and anger. "How can this find out the secret of the mermaid's heart? It can't be that the secret is that when a mermaid falls in love with a human, it will become the mermaid's heart." Ding! Congratulations to the host for finding the secret of the mermaid's heart. Side mission completed. Wei Wei Bai and the system. Oh wow. So careless completed the side mission? The two systems couldn't believe it, their faces full of shock. Ding, it's time to explain. The mermaid's heart is a curse caused by the resentment of all the mermaids for generations after the mermaid king fell in love with a human. It will cut the mermaid king's flesh and finally leave him with a heart full of love and resentment. This heart has a strong power, but it is full of ominous. The day the mermaid king completely falls in love with a human, it will be cursed to death. The method to remove the curse. Method? Damn, you can't continue. This is more than half a will. The murderer, is it still a scam? Wei Wei Bai and the system cursed at the same time. System, suffocating to death. Wei Wei Bai and the system waited for a while. Then they heard the next words. The information is a bit long. I'm too lazy to read it. Just send it directly. A long piece of information appeared in Wei Wei Bai's mind. She tried to pull herself together and sorted out the information in her hands. The standard for mermaids to completely fall in love with a human was 95 favorability. In other words, the curse would break out and kill Vic when he reached the 95th level. And the way to lift the curse was a human heart that fell in love with a mermaid. As long as there was a human who deeply loved the mermaid and was willing to sacrifice their life to the mermaid's heart, a mermaid king would be able to escape. Wei Wei Bai looked at the information and fell into deep thought. This method of dispelling the curse was truly vicious. At first glance, it was the resentment of the merfolk. In any case, the source of this curse was that mermaids and humans would not end well together. Wei Wei Bai thought about it and finally said, Tongzi, are there any discounted goods that can deceive the mermaid's heart and make it think that I'm in love with a mermaid? The system replied, yes, but other than the system instant noodles on sale, there's nothing else on sale in the mall. Wei Wei Bai hesitated. How much HP? System. 500 HP. Wei Wei Bai. Poverty left her with nothing. She sank into deep melancholy. The difference between a discount and a no discount was too big. Wasn't he forcing the poor host to die by asking for 100 or 10,000 at every turn? Wei Wei Bai said helplessly, let's talk about it when the favorability reaches 90. Maybe by then, the mall would have a discount. Although the secret of the mermaid's heart was solved, Wei Wei Bai continued to study mermaids to maintain her persona. In addition, Chun Mo's inexplicable 95 had set up an inescapable net around her to monitor her. She could not think of a way to escape. More than 10 days had passed. During this time, Wei Wei Bai was wrinkled when she bathed. / to make it easier for you to read next time, you can click at the bottom to record this reading. Crossover system. Adonis, come over here. Chapter 690. They didn't see the water turn into Vic. No meeting, no interaction. The favorability didn't increase. Casually raising a mermaid was also successful from the culture tank. But it was an ordinary mermaid, not a king mermaid. Failure was normal, but no one complained about it. It was a female mermaid. Long blue hair like seaweed, a body of 17 or 18 years old. She looked exceptionally beautiful. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head to record the information. Although the pen was moving, she was actually distracted. The mermaid had been cultivated. Should she find a chance to go to the beach and jump in? The heart of the mermaid was on her, and she couldn't drown. And in the sea, it was always easier to find Vic suddenly. She sensed someone beside her and looked up. She saw Chun Mo, who had returned to his human form, wearing a white lab robe, and his hair was combed neatly with hair gel. He smiled politely and calmly. It doesn't matter if you failed this time. Just continue the research. Wei Wei Bai looked at him calmly and put down the pen in her hand. Then she nodded with a flat expression. Chun Mo looked at her with some excitement, but he still held back his excited expression. You've been too tired recently. The lab decided to give you a holiday. Wei Wei Bai said calmly. Thank you. Chun Mo said, is there anywhere you want to go? I can accompany you on a trip to relax. A man said to a woman that he wanted to go on a trip to relax. Who couldn't see this thought? Wei Wei Bai's eyes became more strange, and she said calmly, I think we're not familiar with each other. The excitement in Chun Mo's eyes was broken by sadness. His lips trembled, and he struggled to keep calm and said, "You're a suspect of colluding with the mermaids. You need someone to watch you wherever you go, and your watcher is me." Wei Wei Bai was indifferent. She stretched out her hand. "Give me your surveillance power of attorney. And you keep saying that I colluded with the mermaids. Where's the evidence?" Chun Mo pulled out his phone and opened a file. "This is the surveillance power of attorney. As for the evidence of your collusion with the mermaids." Could she say that he burned it? When she went out to sea with the mermaids, the surveillance along the way, and so on. Take pictures of their route. Also, when she went out to sea to rent a boat, she used her own ID card. This kind of criminal was extremely stupid. After he got ashore and was still in the hospital, he asked his brother to get the first-hand information. They were all destroyed. He still remembered his brother's mocking words. "What's wrong? Are you in love? Why would you do such a thing that doesn't benefit yourself?" This incident made him the laughingstock of his family. Chun Mo replied calmly, "I would have arrested you a long time ago if I had the evidence. You're now a suspect, so keeping an eye on you is the most important thing." Wei Wei Bai was completely unable to take his words seriously when faced with his favorable impression of 95 points. If it was someone with a more normal character, she might let down her guard if he had a favorable impression of 95 points. But was Chun Mo a normal person? 95 favorable impression points suddenly shot up. She had asked the system. Before she came, his favorability towards the original owner was -5. After that, they only met a few times, and their favorability was maintained within the safe range of 10. Until the last time they went out to sea to catch the mermaids. There were guns and storms. Coupled with her kick, his head had hit the railing, and he had a concussion. After that, his favorability was at 95 points. This kind of increase in favorability by Wei Wei used her own rich experience to analyze. Was Chun Mo a super masochist or a pervert? Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://m/sashu.com//the. Chapter 691. The former caused the favorability to rise. The latter was abnormal. Wasn't it normal for favorability to rise randomly? Wei Wei Bai looked at him from the corner of her eyes, then said, "I want to go to sea." Chun Mo said, "Go to sea? Didn't the mermaid abandon you? Why are you going to sea?" Wei Wei Bai must have been abandoned by the mermaid for her to come back so suddenly. Wei Wei Bai pointed at the newly created mermaid. "Set her free." Chun Mo frowned. "The mermaid has a grudge against us, Wei Wei Bai." Wei Wei Bai's serious face showed a trace of soft sadness. "Why do we have to hurt each other? Humans and mermaids don't have to kill each other. This mermaid has bad genes and needs to return to the sea to survive. She is a sin that I created. Whenever I think of her being destroyed, it hurts so much." The system said, "You're so pretentious that I can't eat." Wei Wei Bai said, "That's good. It saves on life." Chun Mo's frown slowly relaxed. "You're so kind." Wei Wei Bai sighed. "Forget it. I won't force it if it doesn't work. It's just that I'll probably live in a nightmare of guilt for the rest of my life." She turned to leave after saying that. Chun Mo suddenly stopped her. "I'll go to sea with you. It takes a lot of power to set a mermaid free. I'll go to sea with you. Then you can set her free." Wei Wei Bai suddenly turned around. A trace of disbelief flashed in her eyes. Then she showed a happy smile. "Thank you." Chun Mo was petrified on the spot, his heart beating like thunder. He couldn't stop bouncing around. Ever since that day, she jumped into the sea without hesitation just to save that mermaid. It broke the stubborn impression he had for many years that people were selfish and ugly. She became his imagination of goodness and beauty. It also made him find the feeling of living. He had seen too many bloody killings and dirty deals. When he was in complete despair, he saw Wei Wei Bai. She was like the only ray of sunshine in his life. Wei Wei Bai, who didn't know that she had turned into a ray of light, began to pack her luggage. The next day, they boarded the military ship that Chinemo called for. On the boat was the mermaid who had just been born. In the middle of the sea, Wei Wei Bai came to the water trough where the mermaid was placed and gently said to her, "Go back to the sea." The mermaid cried out weakly. Wei Wei Bai knew that Chinemo was behind her, so she could only maintain her persona and continue, "It's not that I don't want you anymore. You're the best mermaid I've ever created." The water in the trough suddenly shook, as if it was about to overflow. Wei Wei Bai did not notice and continued to maintain her persona. "I like you very much. I originally wanted to continue raising you, but your body is weak and you need the nourishment of the sea." The water in the sink began to become sharp and ferocious. It silently turned into a water chain that wanted to crawl out of the sink. But Chinemo walked over. "Wei Wei, let's release it. It'll be dark if we wait any longer." Wei Wei Bai nodded. Just as she turned around and was about to leave, she felt a wet touch on her cheek. Chinemo lowered his head and waited for her to turn around. His lips had just touched her soft cheek when he heard her words. From afar, it looked like an intimate kiss. Behind her, the mermaid's sharp scream suddenly rang out. Wei Wei Bai was shocked. She turned around and saw that the water trough was full of terrifying blood. The beautiful mermaid from just now was torn to pieces, and the eyeballs on her ferocious head were gouged out. How savage! The water in the trough was like the ghosts in horror movies, desperately running out of the trough. The water turned into sharp, transparent knives, cutting the cabin and breaking the walls of the ship. In an instant, it came under Wei Wei Bai, wrapped around her ankles, and pulled her under the broken cabin in an instant. Chinemo shouted, "Wei Wei!" He reached out to pull her, but the water seemed to have a grudge against him. It turned into sharp water arrows, and all of them attacked him. Chun Mo's expression changed, and he immediately rolled to one side. Wei Wei Bai also lost her chance to escape and was swept away by the water. The water still had the blood of the dead mermaid, making her extremely uncomfortable. Her whole body was pulled into the sea. In the sea, a pair of ferocious golden eyes appeared in front of her. In the hazy mist, his sharp, thin lips slowly curled up. "Tell me, who is your favorite mermaid?" Chapter 692. Tell me, who is your favorite mermaid? Wei Wei Bai immediately opened her mouth and answered, "Gulyalu, Gulyalu." Forgetting that she was in the water, she almost choked to death when she opened her mouth. She quickly shut her mouth and furrowed her brows tightly. She struggled with all her might to swim up. But as soon as she struggled, the mermaid on the other side immediately roared angrily. The sharp, threatening voice immediately smashed into Wei Wei Bai's eardrums, and she was almost stunned by this threatening warning. With this hesitation, the mermaid on the other side had already swam over quickly, stretched out his strong, long arms, and held her in his arms. The cold and beautiful dark blue fishtail had the power to stir up the sea. It made the nearby sea begin to become restless, and a huge whirlpool appeared. Wei Wei Bai was held in his arms, and a second before she suffocated, he took her to the surface of the sea. The storm seemed to be called by the mermaid, the dark sea, the gloomy sky, and the heavy rain. The military ship that brought her could be submerged in the sea at any time. Wei Wei Bai struggled to open her eyes. The mermaid behind her, his arms were like iron pincers, holding her tightly without letting go. "Those who covet you will all die. I will kill whoever you like." This sentence was cold and piercing, with a paranoid ruthlessness. Wei Wei Bai was cold in the sea and couldn't help but shiver. Wake thought she was afraid. His sharp fingers grabbed her waist and said fiercely, "You too, humans who betray me will be cursed by the sea. You can't escape where there is water." As long as she returned to the sea would report to him. Even on land, as long as she came into contact with water. He could also sense her breath and know where she was. This was the power of the curse when he first put it down. Wake would rather this curse was not used. His nails cut her clothes, and when he was about to cut her skin, he hesitated. In the end, he stopped this dangerous action, and his fingers became gentle again on her waist. The mermaid's heart automatically returned to Vic's hand because it encountered the seawater. After Wake got the mermaid's heart, he reached out to cover her mouth and nose and stuffed a deep-sea pearl into her mouth. Wei swallowed the pearl. I feel like I'm going to have stomach stones sooner or later. Vic grabbed her waist with one hand and plunged into the sea. His speed was like lightning, and he reached the deep sea in an instant. The ocean was getting deeper and deeper. In the end, Wei was a little confused. How long had they been swimming? Wei raised her head and struggled to raise her neck. She saw that his delicate and beautiful jaw was tense, and his golden eyes were filled with hostility. She tried to connect with him. Wake, in fact, the mermaid I like is you. This sentence caused his swimming speed to slow down. But soon he sped up. In the dark sea, countless shining deep-sea fish floated around them. An even more terrifying deep-sea abyss appeared, as if some monster was waiting to eat people. Wei once again felt that the deep sea was terrifying. But Wake seemed to see the destination. His thin lips gently hooked up, revealing a grin. Then he took Wei down. This was the most inescapable place in the ocean. Only mermaids could reach this place, and even humans couldn't come here. The deep sea 30,000 meters below sea level. Wake saw the cave he made and swam in. The upper layer of the cave was dry, and many gems were thrown in. After he took her in, he threw her on the dry seaweed. Then he changed his legs and walked naked in front of Wei Bai. The quick to read at https://www.sashu.com/quick at https://www.sashu.com. The quick to read on. Calm the quick. Chapter 693. Those words had simply shattered his cold and hard fortress. Ding. The male lead's favorability is at 65. Wei Bai got up and reached out to touch him. Vic showed his sharp teeth and said coldly, "Get lost, I won't believe you, and I won't give you the mermaid's heart and let you escape from me." The last time she was taken away by the mermaid's heart, it was the first time he experienced what it meant to be heartbroken. The kind of pain could drive anyone crazy. He would never believe her again. Afraid that she would say something he couldn't resist, he dove into the water and disappeared. Beasts were easily swayed by words. Even if they knew it was a lie, they would still be swayed by their loved ones. Wei Bai sat alone by the water. Gone far? The system said faintly. Scared by you. He ran out of the cave and abused those glowing little animals. Wei Bai said, "If only I could jump into the sea faster." She came to the sea to find a chance to jump into the sea, and then have a chance to explain the misunderstanding. But she didn't expect that Vic would arrive first and destroy the boat. Now, any explanation would seem like a quibble. The system said, "It doesn't matter if you're fast or slow. Sell yourself, and your favorability will fly up immediately." Wei Bai's face was bitter. What if it flies to 95? If this fish dies, who will attack the remaining 5 favorability points? The system said, "You really want to sell yourself." Wei Bai, the system sighed, "I still remember in your first world, you were so desperate because of your first kiss, but now you're taking the initiative to want to have sex." Wei Bai, the system let out a fatherly laugh. Our family's Wei has also grown up. Wei Bai, she was so disgusted that she didn't know how to respond. Wei Bai forcefully changed the topic. Is the thing that deceived the mermaid's heart discounted? The system glanced at the price and said, "It has increased. It has increased from 500 to 1,000 HP. Wei Bai, there must be something wrong with this shopping mall. They can give discounts and raise prices as they please. The prices are just random." The system asked, "What if there's no discount?" Wei Bai, "What else can I do? I'll go sell myself. You go and see if there are any tycoon systems in the system world. See if you can sell me for 1,000,000 or so HP. The system said, "You're so ugly. You can't be sold for a good price." Wei Bai, "Then turn off the blocker." System, "So the main course is here after all the rambling." Wei Wei Bai said, "It's off now. Let me warm it up and see if I can catch a fish." The system's tone turned bitter. This isn't a joke. You might not be able to control yourself. Wei Wei Bai, then go sell yourself. See if you can earn 1,000 HP to buy something for me. System. What the fuck? I've seen systems sell hosts, but I've never seen a host sell a system. Wei Wei Bai said, "Turn it off. I'll save as much HP as I can. Besides, after so many planes, I've never experienced what it means to be tempted. Acting comes from real life." The system said, "What does it have to do with acting?" Wei Wei Bai said, "I've experienced what it feels like to be tempted. Later on, when I meet a worthy opponent, I'll be able to better portray the illusion of being tempted." The system fell silent and finally sighed. "Forget it. As long as you can handle it, I'll turn off the blocker for you. But don't do it again." Before there was an emotional blocker who knew how many hosts had gone crazy. No matter how cold and ruthless a person was, they would not be able to withstand the torture of so many planes. Besides, Wei Wei Bai was not cold at all. /////. Chapter 694. Wake poked a lot of fish to death and wanted to take it back for Wei Wei Bai to eat. The environment here was harsh, not as comfortable and luxurious as the shallow sea area, where there was everything. But it was the safest because only here no one could come. Ordinary mermaids could not dive here. Not to mention humans, there was no human submarine that could dive to this depth. It was just him and her. Wake showed a reassuring smile, but when he thought of her words just now, his heart suddenly hurt. He pinched the fish in his hand into minced meat. In the dark, deep sea, the mermaid's cold and deep facial features looked unusually cruel. She was still delusional to lie to him. Don't dream. Wei Wei Bai had just let the system remove the shield when a slender figure appeared in the water next to her. It was Wake. His black hair floated on the surface of the water, like a terrible ghost, coldly looking at Bai Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai felt a little nervous. She pinched a water plant in her fingers to ease her tension. "You're back." Wei Wei Bai showed a gentle smile and said. Wake's brows furrowed even deeper. He reached out and threw a strangely shaped raw fish at her feet. Wei Wei Bai's smiling face was a little tight, but she didn't say anything. Wake's eyes were gloomy. His voice was cold. "Eat it." Wei Wei Bai's mouth twitched. She glanced at the fish. Flat body, dead fish eyes, a few wriggling tentacles, from time to time spitting out a few mouthfuls of mud. She felt that if she ate it, she would die from the poison. Wake showed a cruel smile. He suddenly climbed out of the water, his beautiful tail slapping the water, full of irritation. "Didn't you say that you like me? I'm the most special? Then why didn't you eat the fish I caught?" Wei Wei Bai picked up the fish and looked at its dead fish eyes. Then the fish was scared and turned green. "Wei Wei Bai, you're going to poison her. Is this a version of Wu Dalong? Come, Doe, eat the fish." Wei Wei Bai's face stiffened. She accepted her fate and put the fish back. However, the fish suddenly grew 4 legs and rushed into the water. Seeing her frightened look, Vic was full of malicious sarcasm, as if his prank had succeeded. "It seems that your love is nothing more than that." After he finished speaking, he stretched out his hand, and the fish that had just escaped appeared in his hand again. Pooh! The fish was crushed into minced meat in his hands. Then he came in front of her and put a ball of minced meat in front of her mouth. "Eat it. This is your punishment for betraying me." She did not love him. She only knew how to deceive him. He would rather she hate him to death and not give him a good face than let him continue to sink deeper and deeper into this lie. Wei Wei Bai knocked on the system. "Are you sure you turned off the signal blocker?" The system replied, "I did." "Are you used to it? Are you aware that your love for the male lead is like an uncontrollable tsunami?" "Wei Wei Bai, I don't love him yet. I seem to dislike him more and more. Shut up in a dark room and not do anything serious. What's with forcing people to eat raw minced fish? This lousy fish can't be loved." Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips. Because of anger, her pale face was tinged with a few traces of red. It was shockingly gorgeous. Just when Vic thought she was going to be angry, she suddenly lowered her head and sucked on the tip of his finger. There was a little bit of minced meat on it. Sharp nails, a light fishy smell, sweet minced fish. Her tentative action unconsciously used more force. The tip of her tongue sucked on his fingertip, and her teeth gently knocked on his finger. Vic's whole body was completely frozen. His heart was like a drum, beating wildly. His fingers were numb. Only the touch of her lips and tongue was frighteningly clear. Wei Wei Bai looked up faintly. Her eyes were a little red, and her delicate face was actually flirtatious at this time. Compared to those most enchanting female mermaids, she was tens of thousands of times more attractive. Wei Wei Bai let go of his fingertip. As if she did not know how seductive she was, there was a hint of pleading in her tone. Vic, let's not mess around, okay? I really like you. Vic's heartbeat suddenly stopped and quieted down. He felt that he was finished. Her seduction made him utterly defeated. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 75. Full text // download / Chapter 695. Humans were indeed the best at deceiving others. Wake remembered that he had heard a lot about how cunning humans were. His Adam's apple bobbed. His fingers trembled so much that his fingernails almost scratched her lips. Almost instinctively, he pulled his hand back. Then he turned around, went to the water, and began to wash his hands. He washed the fish in his hands clean, and he wanted to wash away the feeling of her kissing his fingers. It would be great if he could wash away his feelings as well. Although the system said that the emotional shield was turned off, Wei Wei Bai couldn't feel it at all now. She wondered if it was because they had too little contact. Therefore, she reached out her demonic claws, wanting to touch his strong and sturdy back. As a result, before her fingers touched it, Wake seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. His golden pupils were full of burning anger. He plunged into the water, shaking off Wei Wei Bai's face with water droplets. Then he looked at her with a cold and fierce expression. His hands in the water clenched into fists. Don't be delusional. You think you can seduce me, and I will listen to you. Wei Wei Bai withdrew her hand as if nothing had happened, then hugged her knees with both hands. Her face without glasses was delicate and clean, and even had a trace of innocence. She looked at him calmly. The mermaid became nervous, and his heart beat wildly again. Just one look from her was enough to make him feel as helpless and flustered as a newborn cub. Wei Wei Bai sighed faintly, her eyes soft and sad, cold. Wake's beautiful brows furrowed. And the water here is heavy, my bones can't stand it for a long time, and it will definitely leave behind pain. Wake pursed his thin lips, clenched his teeth tightly, and refused to respond. Did she think that he would still feel sorry for her? Wei Wei Bai put her face on her knees again, looking very pitiful, and looked at him with watery eyes. And I'm hungry. Humans eat raw all the time. They will definitely get gastric problems. Wake soaked in the water, his hair floating around, looking like a delicate, lifeless sculpture. In fact, he was similar to a sculpture now, to resist the weak compromise in his heart. He used all his strength to reject Wei Wei Bai's words. If he listened to one sentence, he would listen to 2 sentences. In the end, even the mermaid's heart might be deceived by her. Wei Wei Bai suddenly covered her mouth and sneezed. Wake couldn't help but look at her. His expression was frighteningly stiff. Suddenly, he dived into the water and disappeared. The smile on Wei Wei Bai's face gradually disappeared. The system carefully probed. How does it feel to turn off the shield? Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. I'm not excited by love, but I really want to kill that fish. She was locked up in a dark cave 30,000 meters below the ground. Not only was there no cell phone or computer, but there wasn't even a decent bed. Moreover, there was nothing to eat even if he was hungry. Even if the clothes were wet, there was no way to change them. It was so exciting to be locked up in a small black room. She felt like she had been thrown into a coal pit to dig for coal. What happened to the ferocious mermaids? She had only shown a little seductive action, and he had run away as if she was going to force herself on him. Wake floated to the shallow sea area, where the mermaids lived were closer to human society. There were also many kinds of human things. Indeed, human beings were different from mermaids. They couldn't stay in the water for a long time. Wake ordered the mermaids to collect a lot of human things. The mermaid's heart was thrown back into the eye of the sea. The bottom of the sea was still peaceful, but there were a lot of gossip and rumors. /mobile. Chapter 696. His keen ears caught a mermaid whispering in the distance. His Majesty is collecting human supplies, most of which are for women. Could it be that the human who betrayed His Majesty is back? Impossible. If she really came back, she would be torn to pieces by him. Also, we mermaids hate betrayal the most. If we can forgive betrayal, it's more true love than true love. Wake listened to some messy discussions. His face was getting darker and darker. He pulled a pile of human supplies and plunged directly into the deep sea. In the dark sea, his calm face finally showed a trace of vulnerability. The cold sea water couldn't calm the fire in his chest. He stayed quietly in the deep sea, his golden eyes looking at his fishtail. He thought that when he caught her, that man kissed her. That was a human like her. Therefore, she actually preferred humans over mermaids. Even if he could change his legs, he wasn't human. Wake was in a daze for a while before he suddenly remembered that Wei Bai was hungry. He hurriedly swam down again. He was afraid that she would really get stomach problems from hunger. Wei Bai had already fallen asleep. When Wake quietly emerged from the water, he saw her lying alone on the seaweed. Her messy long hair was scattered on one side, revealing white, almost transparent skin, which was indescribably lovable. Wake hurriedly changed his legs and climbed out of the water wet. Then he took out all the human things. Because of the special packaging method, they didn't get wet. Vic made the bed for the humans. This cave was very big, so big that it was like a maze. The place where she stayed was only the outermost small area. After making the bed, setting up the cabinet, he took out some human books. She liked books on biological research, and she also had them. There were also human favorite foods, which were all kept warm in insulated boxes. Wake wasn't impatient at all. After everything was done, his mood actually improved. She would live here for a long time until she was really willing to like him. Only then would he dare to take the mermaid's heart and let her make a wish again. They were already married, so he actually had the right to punish her. When she had betrayed him, he had wanted to torture her many times, but he had given up in the end. Wake carefully picked up Wei Bai and placed her on the bed. Wei Bai frowned. It was unknown what she was dreaming of, but her body kept trembling. He touched her face, which was covered in sweat. A trace of worry appeared in Wake's calm eyes. Just as he was about to wake her up, his fingers froze. He had always given in to her. Sooner or later, he would be cunningly used by her. Vic hardened his heart and turned to leave. Before he could take 2 steps, he couldn't help but turn back. He saw that Wei Bai had curled up into a ball, and her face had turned extremely pale. Wake was stunned for a moment, but he still turned around and came to her side. His voice was calm. "Wake up. Did you have a nightmare?" Wei Bai pursed her lips and didn't say anything. She didn't wake up, but she looked so fragile that it made one's heart ache. Wake stared at her blankly. His fingers finally couldn't help but reach out to hug her. She seemed to have found someone to rely on. She burrowed into his arms and rested her head on his shoulder, sobbing softly. Her voice was so broken that Wake couldn't bear it. He hesitated for a moment, then suddenly opened his mouth and sang. The song was ethereal and gentle, full of beautiful love. Even if you didn't understand the lyrics, you could feel the strong feelings in it. // Chapter 697. Wei Bai slowly calmed down. Wake was still singing softly. This was a song that mermen sang to their loved ones. It also had the effect of soothing nightmares. Mermen were creatures that relied on emotions. Even when singing, if there was no love, it would not be able to sing with power. He loved her deeply, so the song was full of gentle feelings for her. Wei Bai had not had nightmares for a long time. While blocking emotions, it also blocked many of her subtle feelings. When she was in the plane, she had a clear goal and never thought of retreating. Even more not to have nightmares. This was the first time she took the risk of turning off the emotion-blocking machine. It was also the first time she clearly felt some emotional changes that she had never noticed before. Nightmares were about the failure of the strategy. When she failed, she was powerless in the face of her life points that kept slipping away. After returning to modern times, she found that she still died on the morning of the heart attack. Lying there alone, he slowly turned into a rotting corpse. This was the deepest fear in her heart. This fear turned into a terrible desire to survive, supporting her to go through so many planes. The nightmare made her very uncomfortable. Suddenly, a gentle and beautiful song sounded. She slowly opened her eyes, and the nightmare left her. With her eyes half closed, she saw Wake holding her, his fingers stroking her hair soothingly, softly singing a song like a lullaby. She stared at him blankly. Wake sensed that she was awake and quickly closed his mouth. He did not have time to put away the gentle love in his expression, looking a little embarrassed. Wei Bai smiled at him. This smile might not have been carefully calculated, but it was full of sweet feelings. She reached out, hugged him, and rested her head on his shoulder. Then she did not speak, closed her eyes, and continued to sleep peacefully. At this moment, the embrace of this stupid fish became the warmest home for her to resist the nightmare. Wake stiffened and heard her breathing gradually calm down. He finally relaxed and exhaled, then like a thief, softly sang the song again. Her smile just now. So cute. Ding. The male lead's favorability is 80. The host has turned off the emotion blocking device. Emotions fluctuate. Please manually turn on the blocker. The system faced the main system's automatic reminder. It chose not to see it. Then it said to itself, "It's not fun to be moved, you'll get hurt," so it would not happen again. From the moment it chose her as its host, it had the idea of protecting her life, even if it had to sacrifice everything. The system glanced at the wheel above its head. In the end, it sighed and no longer made a sound. Then, he looked at his own storage unit and couldn't help but cry out loud. He finished his instant noodles and sobbed. Wei Bai's life. The bed was very comfortable. He was afraid that it would be too cold, so he set up a large stove on the stone wall. From time to time, he would roast a few sweet potatoes. Didn't have a phone, was books, was reading, was also, was book, was had were things. He was like the mermaid version of Mr. Snail. Was she? When she fell asleep at night, something would appear. Wei belatedly realized that he was punishing her betrayal, so he couldn't be nice to her. // Chapter 698. By Wei sighed at the system. This is too straightforward, Look at other people's betrayal punishments. At the drop of a hat, it's digging out the heart and womb. Otherwise, it's killing your whole family and giving you a one-stop sexual abuse service. This merfolk emperor with merfolk blood, why didn't she learn anything? The system trembled. Who treats betrayal so cruelly? Why haven't I seen it? Wei Bai silently raised the book in her hand. Cold President's darling. Love you to torture you to death. System. When Wei Bai heard the sound of water breaking, she immediately stuffed the book back and then pulled out an esoteric book in the field of biology and read it. Suddenly, she looked high and mighty. Wake was dripping wet and wearing a pair of loose trousers on the outside before he walked in. He saw her seriously looking down at a book. It was a book on her profession. Was she still attached to the land? So she was still unwilling to put down her profession. Wake's golden eyes darkened, and he didn't say anything. Wei Bai seemed to have just noticed him. Wake, come here. Wake looked at her indifferently, and finally he reluctantly walked over. Wei Bai picked up a towel, dried his hair, gently massaged it, and whispered, "Don't take it lightly. If your hair is always wet, your head will hurt when you get old." Mermaids were creatures of the water. They would die if they weren't wet. Wake's expression was tight, and he didn't say anything. Wei Bai bowed her head, and her fingers gently pressed his scalp. Wake stiffened his neck, too comfortable to let her know. Wei Bai said, "Wake, do you know? The mermaid's heart has a secret. I took it away last time because I wanted to study this secret. Speaking of the mermaid's heart, Wake's expression changed. He gritted his teeth, and his eyes turned cold. You really are good to me to get the mermaid's heart. She tried her best to make him trust her and like her, but it was just to get the mermaid's heart. He said coldly, what secret? Is it the secret that can destroy the merfolk? So you can't wait to sell this secret to the humans so that they can deal with the mermaids. Wei Wei Bai's fingers paused, and her voice lowered. No, I just want the merfolk and humans not to kill each other, so I want to— Wake interrupted her sarcastically. You betrayed me no matter what I wanted. Bai Weiwei's action of wiping his hair stopped. Wake felt that the atmosphere was a little quiet, and suddenly something wet hit his head. His cold expression changed, and he couldn't help but raise his head. However, he saw Weiwei Bai looking at him with tears in her eyes. He couldn't look her in the eye. I didn't betray you. She reached out and calmly wiped the tears from her eyes. Speak without any vehemence. However, it made him feel a kind of heart-wrenching pain. Wake's eyes became ruthless, and he came to lie to him again. He grabbed her hand and stuffed a pearl into her mouth. Then he dragged her into the water. After a relatively long time upstream, they finally came to the surface of the sea. Weiwei Bai felt that the sun was a little dazzling, and she saw many ships not far away. Wake took her immediately to the largest military ship, and he nimbly climbed onto the ship with Weiwei Bai on his back. On the deck, Chinemo was reprimanding others. Bombs are fine, submarines are also fine. Give me the best, I don't believe that I can't find people. Weiwei Bai blinked. Wake had already pushed her onto the deck. Chinemo heard the sound and quickly turned around. When he saw Weiwei Bai, he became excited. Weiwei. Wake stood beside her and stared at her with his golden eyes. He showed a cold and bloodthirsty smile. Now you have to choose. Do you want him or me? She said that she wouldn't betray him, just because she didn't have a choice. As long as she had a choice, she would still return to the land and return to this human man. T. Chapter 699. Weiwei Bai's mouth couldn't help but twitch. Why does it sound so shameful to hear such a cliché line? She struggled to get up, but when she looked back, she saw Wake standing behind her, leaning against the railing. His cold eyes were a deep golden color. He looked at her so seriously and stared at her with all his might. Chun Mo saw the mermaid behind her, and his face changed. He waved his hand to get the weapons ready. Then he slowly walked over. Weiwei, come here. I'll take you back. His tone was so soft, as if he was afraid of disturbing the mermaid behind Weiwei. The mermaid's fingers were terrible, and they were the best weapon. And the place where Weiwei Bai was standing was just where the mermaid could raise his hand to attack. This made Chun Mo not dare to speak loudly. Weiwei Bai seemed to be stunned for a moment. She looked at Wake somewhat helplessly, and then glanced at Chun Mo. When she looked at Chun Mo, Wake's fingers were holding the railing, and his sharp nails directly cut the iron railing. He stared at Weiwei Bai, and his heart turned cold. It was like being peeled out by her and thrown into an ice bucket. Weiwei Bai couldn't care about anything. Don't hurt him. Chun Mo's footsteps paused, and he looked at her with some shock. Weiwei Bai saw that those people had begun to prepare the weapons to shoot the mermaid. Her eyes flashed with panic, and her hand couldn't help but grab Wake's fingers. Wake's nails retracted, so as not to hurt her soft fingers. Weiwei Bai pursed her lips and couldn't care about anything else. She turned back and said to Wake, "Take me to the sea. Wake, it's dangerous for you here. Isn't it courting death to rashly board a military ship? No matter how powerful the mermaid is, it's still in the water. Without the sea, any weapon can cause great harm to him." Wake's cold eyes were shattered by the anxiety on her face. His tone was still calm. Don't you like this human? Under the calmness, his fingers grasped her even harder. He refused to let her go. Weiwei Bai frowned, her lips trembling with excitement. She repeated with some doubt, I like this human? Chinemo. Chinemo stood not far away. When he heard her say this, he couldn't help but stop, wanting to hear her answer. Wake's eyes were so cold that it could cut people. He said coldly, let him kiss you. Weiwei Bai was stunned for a moment, and then she laughed softly as if she heard a joke. She looked up. Her gaze was gentle like the sun above the ocean, warm and full of love. Then, she raised her head and kissed him gently on the corner of his lips. Now that I'm kissing you, does that mean I like you? The mermaid, demon mermaid, maid tide, ye chins come tide ye. Chun-mo, 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 and chun-mo calm, and chun-mo. Chun-mo didn't look too good. He tried his best to stay calm and said casually, I don't like you either. Don't flatter yourself. Even if he was rejected, he couldn't be embarrassed. Chun-mo felt like his heart was about to split open. Wei Wei Bai's expression softened. I won't go back to the mainland in the future. Chun-mo, help me quit the lab job. You can treat me as a traitor or want to arrest me, but I want to introduce my husband to you. Chun-mo's voice trembled out of tune. Husband? Wei Wei Bai looked up. Under the sun, the mermaid's eyes turned from gold to dark blue. His hatred seemed to fade because of her words. Wake also repeated softly, Husband, / to facilitate your next reading. You can click at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 700. The two men said the same thing at the same time, but both their tones and emotions were different. Wei Wei Bai gently swept her eyes over Wake. Wake, I don't have any way out. I've already betrayed humanity. Only you are left. Wake only felt that her eyes, her words, were more offensive than any weapon on this ship. It could easily break his defenses. She held his hand. So I choose you. When she said this, she couldn't help but smile. No, I didn't have a choice at all. You were my favorite from the beginning. My first favorite was you. My second favorite was also you. I chose and chose. It was you. Wake stared at her blankly. His heart was finally cut open by her words. His bitter heart was filled with her sweet words. Sour, sweet, everything. He didn't know how to react at all. His eyes gradually became lighter. The ice blue pupils returned, and his hair began to turn golden. Under the sun, he was so exquisite that people thought they were looking at the sea god. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 85. A man and a fish looked at each other. It was like an incomparably beautiful picture that people couldn't bear to break. Chun-mo was speechless for a while, feeling that his mouth was full of bitter dog food. He took a deep breath and finally remembered his duty. Attack this mermaid for me, and this woman who betrayed humanity. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she was so scared that she threw herself into Wake's arms. Let's run, Wake. This was such a warm word. Wake hugged her and immediately plunged into the sea. The sea happily fluctuated. The seagulls flew around. They were all happy for the mermaid. The people on the side immediately shouted, Fire the cannons. There's also a barbed mermaid net. Get them ready. Chun-mo immediately ran back and kicked the soldier away. He shouted, Who told you to fire the cannons? Do you know how dangerous it is? A barbed net. Don't you know that this thing is poisonous and can stab people to death? Do you have a brain? Just shout a few times and it'll be fine. Why are you doing it for real? After being kicked in the butt, the soldier asked in fear, Why are you crying? Chun-mo's face was full of tears. He rolled up his sleeves and started to beat him to death. I'm not crying. The sea breeze got into my eyes. It's salty. How could she choose a mermaid? Chun-mo was reminded of the time when she jumped into the sea for the mermaid without any fear of death. So from that moment on, he knew that she had really fallen in love with that fish. Wake jumped into the sea with her in his arms and plunged straight into the sea. He held her in his arms and didn't say anything. His golden hair floated in the sea. A huge school of fish swam past him. Wake suddenly said, Did you really choose me? Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment before nodding gently. I've always chosen you. I saw you being born with my own eyes and watched you grow up with my own eyes. I've never thought of betraying you. Vic really wanted to ask, what about last time? Why did he take the mermaid's heart and run away? Wei Wei Bai seemed to know his concerns. She sighed. Because the mermaid's heart has a secret. It seems to be about mermaids. I read in ancient mermaid books that the mermaid's heart will bring disaster to the king of mermaids. I don't want you to be hurt. Wake persistently asked, What hurt? Wei Wei Bai hesitated. If you fall in love with a human, you will die. Wake stopped swimming and his expression froze for a moment. Wei Wei Bai immediately said, At that time, I remembered that information. That's why I took the mermaid's heart and ran away. I want to take it and study it. Collect below to record this reading record. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.